Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. In the summer of 1983, my stepmom Diane was still a college student at Blackwater University. It wasn't her first year there, but she was still young enough to be caught up in the chaos of it all, the late nights, the parties, the wild energy that made the campus feel like one big adrenaline rush. I always heard stories from her about those days, stories of her and her best friend Jenna, the two of them inseparable and always getting into trouble together. Jenna was the ringleader, always the one with the crazy ideas and the devil-may-care attitude. She was the type of girl who dared you to jump off cliffs and kiss strangers at bonfires. Diane would laugh about her, talking about how Jenna had that effect on everyone, how she made you feel like you were invincible, like nothing could touch you. She made the world seem exciting, reckless, like there was a thrill in every bad decision. And Diane? She was more grounded than Jenna. She was smart, too smart for the wild crowd, but she followed along. She was the type to stay up all night, studying, but still show up at Jenna's door when she came knocking, always ready for whatever trouble Jenna was brewing. Maybe it was because Diane wanted to feel that rush too. Or maybe it was because, despite everything, Jenna was the kind of friend who made life feel like an adventure. It was the summer between their sophomore and junior years that Diane and Jenna decided to ditch class for a hiking trip. It wasn't unusual for them to skip out on things like that, to go on some impromptu adventure. But this time was different. This time, they decided to hike the Black Ridge Trails, a place that had its own dark reputation. The locals always whispered about the woods around Black Ridge, the disappearances, the mystery, the unsolved cases. They called it Devil's Hollow, and for good reason. There were stories, rumors, about people who'd gone missing and never been found. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was just the weird energy of the place. But something about those woods unsettled everyone. Diane and Jenna were a little drunk when they decided to venture off the main trail. They were laughing too loud, not realizing the danger they were walking straight into. Jenna was the one who spotted the deer path, and without a second thought, she led them down it. Diane tried to keep up, feeling a little uneasy, but it was Jenna's laugh, wild and carefree, that drowned out all the warnings in her head. The sun was setting fast by the time they'd veered deep into the woods, the sky a fiery orange and purple that bled into the darkening trees. The shadows stretched long, almost reaching out to grab them as they moved deeper into the forest, away from the path they were supposed to follow. It was supposed to be fun. Just a quick detour, nothing more. But it didn't feel like that anymore. Diane started to feel it then, something in the air, a heaviness. That's when they heard it, the sound of an engine. The engine rumbled through the stillness of the woods, distant at first but growing closer, like it had been waiting for them to wander off the trail. Diane and Jenna stopped in their tracks, the sound of it echoing through the trees. The air shifted, the weight of the moment making everything feel too quiet, too still. Diane's unease grew. Something about the sound of that engine didn't sit right. It didn't belong here, not out in the middle of nowhere. Jenna, of course, didn't feel the same. She flashed a grin at Diane, the kind of grin that made her feel like she was part of some secret club. Jenna lived for moments like this, when the world seemed to stop and you could do whatever you wanted. The more reckless, the better. "Come on, let's see who's out here," Jenna said with that mischievous tone in her voice. She took off down the path, and Diane hesitated for just a second before following her, feet crunching through the underbrush. As they moved closer to the sound of the engine, Diane tried to shake off the feeling gnawing at her stomach. It could be just a local, maybe someone looking for a shortcut to the main road. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how strange it was to hear a vehicle this far into the woods. The roads were narrow, twisted, and the black ridge trails weren't exactly a destination for anyone who didn't already know the area. Then they saw it, a rust-eaten Ford pickup parked on the side of the narrow deer path. Its paint was the color of dried blood, dull and chipped from years of neglect. The truck was old, the kind of vehicle that had clearly seen better days but still kept going, like it was stubbornly clinging to life. Behind the wheel sat a man, and everything about him felt off from the start. He looked like someone straight out of an old Western movie. Smooth, confident grin, too much charm, too much confidence, and eyes that didn't blink enough. "Y'all look lost," the man said, his drawl thick and slow, like he had all the time in the world. His voice was strangely calm, but there was something in it that sent a chill up Diane's spine. "Hop in. I'll get you back to the main road." Jenna, ever the adventurer, didn't hesitate. She flashed Diane a grin, and before Diane could voice any concerns, Jenna was already climbing into the truck, her leather jacket creaking as she settled onto the cracked vinyl seat. Diane hesitated, her gut telling her to stay away, but Jenna was already grinning at her from the passenger seat. "What's the worst that could happen?" Jenna called out, laughing, the sound as carefree as ever, and despite the tight knot in her chest, Diane climbed into the truck beside her. The door slammed shut, and just like that, the feeling of unease settled over her once again. The engine rumbled through the stillness of the woods, distant at first but growing closer, like it had been waiting for them to wander off the trail. Diane and Jenna stopped in their tracks, the sound of it echoing through the trees. The air shifted, the weight of the moment making everything feel too quiet, too still. Diane's unease grew. Something about the sound of that engine didn't sit right. It didn't belong here, not out in the middle of nowhere. Jenna, of course, didn't feel the same. She flashed a grin at Diane, the kind of grin that made her feel like she was part of some secret club. Jenna lived for moments like this, when the world seemed to stop and you could do whatever you wanted. The more reckless, the better. "Come on, let's see who's out here," Jenna said with that mischievous tone in her voice. She took off down the path, and Diane hesitated for just a second before following her, feet crunching through the underbrush. As they moved closer to the sound of the engine, Diane tried to shake off the feeling gnawing at her stomach. It could be just a local, maybe someone looking for a shortcut to the main road. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how strange it was to hear a vehicle this far into the woods. The roads were narrow, twisted, and the black ridge trails weren't exactly a destination for anyone who didn't already know the area. Then they saw it, a rust-eaten Ford pickup parked on the side of the narrow deer path. Its paint was the color of dried blood, dull and chipped from years of neglect. The truck was old, the kind of vehicle that had clearly seen better days but still kept going, like it was stubbornly clinging to life. Behind the wheel sat a man, and everything about him felt off from the start. He looked like someone straight out of an old Western movie. Smooth, confident grin, too much charm, too much confidence, and eyes that didn't blink enough. "Y'all look lost," the man said, his drawl thick and slow, like he had all the time in the world. His voice was strangely calm, but there was something in it that sent a chill up Diane's spine. "Hop in. I'll get you back to the main road." Jenna, ever the adventurer, didn't hesitate. She flashed Diane a grin, and before Diane could voice any concerns, Jenna was already climbing into the truck, her leather jacket creaking as she settled onto the cracked vinyl seat. Diane hesitated, her gut telling her to stay away, but Jenna was already grinning at her from the passenger seat. "What's the worst that could happen?" Jenna called out, laughing, the sound as carefree as ever. And despite the tight knot in her chest, Diane climbed into the truck beside her. The door slammed shut, and just like that, the feeling of unease settled over her once again. As the truck rumbled deeper into the woods, Diane's stomach twisted with an unease she couldn't shake. The smell inside the rusted pickup was overwhelming. Old meat, motor oil, something rancid that lingered in the air like the truck itself had been through too many long, sweaty summers. The vinyl seats creaked beneath them as they drove, And Diane couldn't help but notice how her thigh stuck to the fabric, the heat of the seat clinging to her skin in a way that felt wrong. She glanced at Jenna, who was leaning back in the passenger seat with her arms crossed, a carefree grin still, plastered on her face. Jenna always had this effect on her, making everything seem like an adventure, like there was nothing to fear. But Diane's instincts were screaming at her now. She didn't like the way the man was driving. There was a sense of purpose in the way he navigated the winding dirt path like he had done this many times before, and the way the truck seemed to sink deeper into the woods made her feel trapped. At the edge of her vision, Diane saw something that made her blood run cold. Beneath the passenger seat, half hidden beneath a pile of dirty coats, was a coil of frayed rope. The kind you'd use for something heavy, something that needed to be tied down. The sight of it made her stomach lurch. She quickly looked away, but the image lingered, as though it had burned itself into her mind. Her eyes drifted to the glove compartment next. It was slightly open, and inside, Diane saw a roll of saran wrap, its edges crinkling like it had been used, then carelessly shoved back inside. A wave of nausea hit her, and she fought the urge to gag. Jenna was still chatting with the driver, laughing about something stupid, but Diane couldn't hear the words anymore. The images of the rope and the plastic wrap kept playing over and over in her mind. The man's voice cut through her, thoughts like a knife. "You girls sure are quiet back there," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Don't be shy. You're not far from the road now." Diane swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. The sound of the truck's engine felt like it was pounding in her chest, and for the first time, she couldn't help but wonder if they'd made a mistake. They had no idea who this guy was or where he was taking them, but Jenna wasn't worried. Of course she wasn't. She was too busy trying to flirt with him, her laugh ringing out like she didn't have a care in the world. Diane was certain now, something wasn't right. And when the truck finally came to a stop, her suspicions were confirmed. The truck was parked in front of a crumbling hunting cabin, its windows boarded up and its porch sagging like a rotten smile. "Wait here," the man said, still grinning. "I gotta grab something." Diane's pulse quickened. Something was very wrong. She looked at Jenna, but Jenna was already grinning, clearly oblivious to the danger. Diane could feel the weight of the moment settling over her like a dark cloud. As the truck's engine cut off, Diane's heart pounded in her chest. The man's voice still echoed in her ears. "Wait here, I gotta grab something." Those words lingered in the air, thick with menace, and a cold sweat broke out across Diane's back. She glanced over at Jenna, who was sitting with a grin plastered across her face, completely unaware of the sinking feeling in Diane's gut. Diane's mind raced. She couldn't sit still any longer. There was a sickening knot forming in her stomach, a feeling that had been creeping up on her ever since the man had first pulled up beside them. This wasn't some friendly stranger offering a ride. This wasn't an innocent mistake. This was something darker. And the longer they stayed in that truck, the more trapped she felt. Jenna was still staring out the window, distracted by the view of the darkening woods, the way the shadows seemed to close in around them. Diane tried to focus, tried to stay calm, but the small, creeping voice of dread was too loud in her mind. She looked around, hoping to find some escape, some way out of this nightmare. But the truck was too far from the main road, the trees too thick on every side. Then, as if it were fate, her eyes landed on the glove compartment. It was still slightly open, the saran wrap and rope just barely visible. Her throat tightened. The man had been too careless, too confident, leaving those things in plain sight. But what if he wasn't just careless? What if he had meant for them to see them? What if this was part of the plan? Without a word, Jenna continued to hum along to the radio, unaware of the suffocating tension that had settled over Diane. Diane's hand hovered over the door handle. It was time to act. The moment the man stepped out of the truck and disappeared into the cabin, Diane didn't hesitate. Her hand shot toward the glove compartment, pulling open the small compartment, her fingers trembling as she reached for the hatchet. The metal felt wrong in her hands, heavy, cold, with something slick and sticky that flaked off the blade, leaving a dark stain on her fingers. She didn't wait to think. She didn't need to. As the sound of footsteps faded into the distance, she slammed the glove compartment shut and turned toward Jenna, her voice low and urgent. "Jenna, we need to run now." Jenna's eyes went wide, and for the first time her smile faltered. The playful energy in her expression was gone. Diane didn't wait for an answer. She threw open the door and bolted out into the woods, the branches scratching at her arms as she plunged through the undergrowth, heart racing. Jenna was right behind her, though her breath was coming in sharp, panicked gasps. Diane could hear the engine roar to life behind them, and it sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through her veins. They couldn't stop. They couldn't slow down. The sound of the truck's engine grew louder, closer, and Diane forced herself to push forward, faster, even though the branches seemed to reach for her, the underbrush tripping her up with every step. They ran until their legs burned, until their lungs felt like they were on fire, and somehow, by some miracle, they made it. The beat-up Mustang sat at the edge of the woods, its headlights dim, but the key was still in the ignition. Hands shaking violently, Diane fumbled with the key, her fingers numb. The truck's engine was only a few yards behind them, the sound of its tires grinding on dirt sending fresh panic through her. With a final desperate twist, the engine roared to life, and they peeled out of the woods, the Mustang's tires squealing against the dirt. But when Diane dared to look back, her breath caught in her throat. Standing at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the fading light, was the man. His figure stood completely still, watching them, his grin now gone. His eyes, those eyes were cold and dead, and in the stillness of the night, it was like everything else had faded away, and he wasn't smiling anymore. It wasn't until they were halfway down the winding road, the trees finally starting to thin, that Diane felt the adrenaline begin to fade. Her hands were still shaking on the wheel, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but Jenna was silent now, her face pale, her eyes wide. The earlier sense of exhilaration was gone. Now there was only the suffocating weight of what they had just escaped. Diane glanced at her, heart still racing. "Jenna, you okay?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Jenna was the type to laugh everything off, to shake off even the darkest moments like they were nothing more than a bad joke. But this time there was no laughter, no wink. Just silence. Jenna's lips parted, but the words didn't come. She was staring out the window, her eyes lost in the passing landscape as if she couldn't really see it. Jenna started, then stopped herself, shaking her head. I can't believe that just happened." The Mustang jolted as it hit a pothole, and the sound seemed to jar them both back to reality. Diane gripped the wheel tighter. The image of the man standing at the tree line still burned into her mind. He hadn't been smiling. Not when they drove away. There had been something empty in his gaze, like he knew something they didn't, something that made the whole world feel a little off balance. The night stretched out before them, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the road. But even though they were driving away from the woods, Diane couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't free. Not really. "Diane?" Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Do you think he's still out there?" Diane's stomach twisted, and she didn't answer right away. She couldn't bring herself to say it out loud, but the thought gnawed at her. The man, the truck, the way he had watched them run, like he was waiting for the right moment to strike, like he hadn't given up on them yet. The man had known they would escape. He hadn't rushed. He just watched them, waiting patiently. When they finally reached the outskirts of town, the weight in the air grew heavier. Diane turned off the main road, but before she could head toward the nearest gas station, something caught her eye. An old news report pinned to the bulletin board in the diner window. The headline was almost too much to bear. "Local girls missing, police investigating Black Ridge area." Diane's heart stopped, her fingers gripping the wheel until her knuckles turned white. Jenna leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Those girls," she murmured. "They look like..." But Diane couldn't hear her anymore. The world around her seemed to blur, the sounds of the engine fading. All she could think about was the man, the truck, the empty smile. He was still out there, and he was still hunting. The engine hummed softly in the background, but beneath the static of the radio, Diane could almost hear it. The faint, familiar hum of an old engine getting closer, and somehow she knew he wasn't done with them yet. The neon sign of the Lucky Ace Casino flickered above me, casting a sickly glow over the wet streets of Port Nocturne. It was the kind of night where even the rain seemed to carry a sense of defeat, the droplets splashing against the sidewalk, like a chorus of bad decisions. My head pounded, probably from too many cheap whiskeys and not enough sleep, and the wet leather of my coat clung to my shoulders, making everything feel 10 pounds heavier than it already was. I was broke. Not just empty pockets broke. No, this was a different kind of broken. The kind that keeps you awake at night. The kind that makes you wonder if you'll ever get back up. I'd been lucky enough to stay one step ahead of Varga, the loan shark, but not for much longer. Every call, every message, every menacing knock at the door from his thugs made me wish I could just disappear. My debts were spiraling, and the sum was growing every damn day. $28,000, and I wasn't going to be able to outrun it forever. That's when I saw him. He was at the far end of the bar, a man sitting alone almost like he was waiting for me. He wasn't the kind of guy you'd expect to find in a place like this. His pinstripe suit was old enough to look deliberate, like it was chosen to make a statement, the kind of statement you can't ignore. The man had a face that could have been handsome if it weren't so sharp, like the kind of face that would follow you around in the crowd and you'd swear you saw it even when you turned around. He didn't fit in here, not in this run-down joint, not in this city. I could feel his eyes on me before I could make it to the bar stool. Something about him felt wrong. I wasn't sure why, but I could tell he wasn't the type of person who left things to chance. As I slid onto the bar stool, his smile stretched across his face, but it never quite reached his eyes. "Silas Ward," he said, his voice low and almost too smooth. "You look like a man who could use a lucky break." I didn't respond right away. My eyes flicked to the glass of whiskey he'd slid in front of me, the amber liquid shimmering in the dim light, like it had already made up its mind about what it was going to do. Something about the way he said it, though, made me think that Silas Ward wasn't really his name, or at least not his first name, or his last. I didn't ask him how he knew I could use a break. People like him had a way of reading you, didn't they? I lifted the glass, the burn of alcohol already familiar to me. But this felt different, like the whiskey knew exactly where to hit, exactly how to settle. I leaned in, feeling the weight of his gaze on me. "What's the catch?" Silas's grin widened and he leaned forward, his long fingers curling around his own drink. The nails just a shade too yellow to be normal. "Just a favor," he murmured. "Down the line." I should have run. Should have walked right out that door before he could say anything else. But the way he said it was like he already knew every bad hand I'd ever been dealt, every poor decision I'd made, every single time the universe had kicked me when I was already down. The whiskey burned down my throat, and for a moment it felt like maybe, just maybe, I could let someone else handle the cards for once. The days blurred together after that first meeting. At first I thought maybe Silas was just another one of those weird guys you meet when you're in a place like the Lucky Ace. A man who has seen too much and wants to share a drink with someone who'll listen. I'd almost convinced myself that I'd been wrong about him, that maybe he was just another hustler who smelled desperation from a mile away. But then the wind started. It was the first time I sat down at the blackjack table after Silas's offer. I wasn't expecting anything really, just a way to kill time and distract myself from the growing pile of debt that was suffocating me. My luck had been miserable for months, but when the dealer slid me my first hand, I felt something shift. The cards came to me like they were meant to be mine, stacking up perfectly as though they were being dealt from a deck that only knew how to favor me. I played cautiously at first, trying to keep my mind in check, but with each hand, I could feel the luck building. I could feel the pressure lifting off me, if only a little. I wasn't winning big, not yet, but the cards, they were kind. It was as if the game was changing to suit my needs. I felt a familiar rush, that sickly sweet high of victory, the kind that comes from knowing you're not supposed to win, but somehow, against all odds, you do. Then, it happened. I got a hand, $30,000 signed, on a single blackjack. The dealer's face went slack and I heard a few murmurs around the table, but it didn't feel like it was happening in real time. It was like I was watching someone else's life unfold. One second I was staring at the glowing green felt, and the next, I was watching the dealer count my chips, 30,000 in chips, stacked in front of me. I blinked, my heart racing, a dizzy feeling creeping up my spine. I had never seen numbers like this. Not in this casino, not in my life, not in this city. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking, but the moment I did, I saw him. Silas was sitting at the bar again, watching me with that smile, the same unsettling grin that had haunted me the night we met. His eyes never left mine. He nodded once, acknowledging my victory, like it was just part of the deal. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't help it. I walked over to him, the chip still in my hand, the sound of my shoes against the sticky floor echoing in my ears. I sat down beside him without saying a word. He didn't have to say anything either. He already knew. "Impressive," Silas said, his voice low and rich, but there was no joy in it. No celebration, just the cold recognition of something inevitable. "What's going on?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. The question had been bubbling up for hours and I could feel the weight of it pressing on me. I needed to understand. Silas didn't answer right away. He sipped his drink, the ice in his glass clinking softly as he tilted it back. Then he set it down, his eyes darkening just a little. "You've got the luck of a man who's been chosen," he said, almost matter-of-factly. "But nothing in this world comes without a cost, not even your wins." He leaned in slightly, his fingers brushing the glass in front of him, almost like they were dancing on the edge. "I specialize in turning fortunes around," he continued. "But the house always collects, no exceptions." I blinked, trying to make sense of his words. "The house?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist. He nodded, his smile wide but unfeeling. "Everything has a price, my friend. And when you've won, that price comes due. That's why you're here." His words hit me like a slap in the face. It was too much to process, too much to take in all at once. But somehow, a part of me, the desperate part, the part that had lost everything, was starting to understand. The game wasn't just about luck. It was about something darker, something deeper. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the knot that had suddenly formed in my throat. "And when do I have to pay up?" I asked, not sure if I wanted the answer. Silas looked at me for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. "Soon," he said simply, with a finality that sent a chill through me. That night I went home with a pocket full of cash, but the weight of it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a setup, like the strings were already being pulled and I was too far gone to stop it. The next night I played again. The cards kept coming, one win after another. 50,000 on roulette, 70,000 at the poker table. It was like the universe had flipped a switch and started dealing me a hand I couldn't lose. But each win, each moment of exhilaration only deepened the pit in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't normal, that something, someone, was manipulating it all. I couldn't stop. And then, the dreams started. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with Silas standing at the foot of my bed. His face stretched too tight as though it were being pulled by invisible strings, and his eyes, those eyes, were endless pits, like he could peer into everything I'd ever hidden from myself. He'd whisper numbers to me, strings of them, and the sound would make my teeth ache. The numbers were always the same, 3, 7, 13, 42, and every time he whispered them, it felt like my reality was bending, like the rules of the game were shifting, beneath me. But it wasn't just the dreams, it was the feeling of something, someone, always following me. the quiet rustling in the corners of my vision, the breath that ruffled my hair like dry leaves in the wind. I'd wake up from the dreams, but the fear stayed. It stayed like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness, and no matter where I went, it followed. I should have walked away. I should have known better. But I kept playing, because for the first time in a long time I felt like I was winning. Like I finally had control of something, and I didn't know then, but the truth was, I was never in control. The first night I woke up with my heart pounding, the sensation of something crawling in the dark. I thought it was just the weight of the game catching up to me. After all, I'd been on a hot streak for days, jackpot after jackpot, chip after chip, stacking up faster than I could count. It felt like I had entered another world where the rules didn't apply, where luck just happened to favor me, no questions asked. I thought I could control it, thought I could ride the wave until I was too far out to be dragged under. But the closer I got to the edge, the more I felt something pulling, tugging at the corners of my mind. That first dream, I didn't really know it was a dream until I woke up. Silas was standing at the foot of my bed, his face stretched tight, too thin, like it was being pulled on invisible strings. His eyes, those eyes, were deep, black voids, like endless pits that sucked everything in. I don't know why I didn't scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared, the silence between us so thick it suffocated me. And then he whispered, his voice hollow like it was coming from a distance. "You're getting close. The numbers are the key." The numbers. They had been coming to me in flashes, in bursts. 3, 7, 13, 42. They were the same numbers that had been showing up in my dreams, the same numbers that kept floating in my head when I looked at the roulette wheel or dealt my hand at the blackjack table. They weren't random. I knew that now. They were part of the pattern, part of the game. But what did they mean? I shot up in bed, drenched in sweat, my body trembling as if it had just run a marathon. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, so wrong that I couldn't put it into words. The air in my apartment felt cold, too cold for the summer. The city noise, always distant and muffled, seemed to press closer. I knew then that I couldn't go back to sleep. I couldn't risk slipping back into that nightmare, back into Silas's grasp. The next morning, I barely made it through the day. The feeling that I wasn't alone was suffocating. Every step I took felt heavy, like I was walking through thick molasses. My skin was tight, my thoughts scattered, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't focus on anything. I was too busy counting the numbers in my head, too busy wondering if they were leading me somewhere, leading me into something I couldn't escape. When I stepped into the Lucky Ace that night, it was like the casino had become a different place. The lights seemed harsher, the sounds of the machines louder, more grating. It wasn't the same thrill I'd felt earlier. Now it was all just noise. I wasn't playing for fun anymore. I wasn't playing for the rush, it felt like I was playing for my very soul. And every time I won, every time I hit another number, another lucky streak, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like I was sinking further, like I was getting closer, to something I didn't understand but was terrified of. I sat at the roulette table, my fingers tight around the chips. I had a few hundred left, a far cry from the jackpots I'd racked up, but it didn't matter. The numbers were swirling in my head like a whirlpool, faster and faster, louder and louder. 3, 7, 13, 42. They weren't just numbers, they were warnings. I couldn't stop thinking about Silas's voice, his empty smile. He'd said, "The house always collects." What did that mean? I had to know. The dealer slid the wheel and I watched the ball spin, hypnotized by the rhythm, by the sound of the ball rattling around the track. I put my chips down on 42. It wasn't even a conscious decision anymore. It just felt right. Like the numbers were leading me, like I was playing my part in a game I didn't understand. The ball landed. 42. I felt a rush of cold that made my skin crawl, like ice running through my veins. The table erupted in cheers around me, but I didn't hear them. The dealer pushed my chips toward me, but it felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. My hand reached out for the chips, but it was like I wasn't the one in control anymore. Something else was pulling the strings. I stumbled back from the table, unable to stop myself. I felt a tightness in my chest, a pressure building behind my ribs. I needed to leave. But as I turned to walk away, I saw him again. Silas, at the far end of the casino, standing by the bar, watching me. No smile this time. No recognition. Just that same cold gaze that seemed to pierce through everything. I moved toward him, my feet moving on their own, the crowd parting like they couldn't see me. When I got close enough, he didn't speak. He just nodded toward the exit. "Go on," he said, his voice low, like it was just for me. "You've had your fun, but you've made your deal. Now it's time to pay." I froze. The air felt thicker now, harder to breathe. The weight of his words crashed down on me, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "You'll see," Silas said, his smile now twisted too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. "You'll see soon enough." I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The pull was too strong, and my feet were stuck to the floor. As I walked out of the casino, my hand reaching for the door, I felt it, the first real crack in my reality. The walls around me felt thin, paper thin, like they were going to collapse any moment. And as I stepped outside into the night, the rain started falling, heavy and cold, like it was washing away everything I thought I knew. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The rain pounded against the street as I stepped out of the Lucky Ace, the neon lights of the casino flickering behind me, casting an eerie glow on the wet pavement. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping away, that I was no longer playing in the same world as everyone else. It was like I'd crossed a line, like the game had become something darker, something I didn't understand. Knew I should have walked away from it all. I should have gotten in a cab and gone home, away from Silas, away from the casino. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop. There was a nagging pull, like I had made a deal I couldn't back out of. The money, 30,000, 50,000, it didn't matter. The wins kept coming faster than I could spend them. But every time I hit the jackpot, I could feel the walls around me getting thinner, like the ground was starting to give way beneath my feet. I had thought that money could fix things, but it didn't. It was just a temporary distraction. And now, as I stood there in the rain, it felt like the weight of everything I'd done was finally catching up with me. I pulled the collar of my jacket up against the chill of the night air, but it didn't help. I was cold in a way that wasn't just physical. The emptiness inside me was growing, a void that I couldn't fill with anything. Not money, not the rush of a win, not even the whiskey that still burned in my stomach. It wasn't enough. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing Varga's name on the screen. My stomach twisted, but I answered anyway, pressing the phone to my ear. I had been avoiding his calls for weeks, but this was different. Something told me I couldn't avoid him anymore. "Varga," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Debts cleared?" Varga's gravelly voice came through the line, his words flat and cold. "But you should have read the fine print." I didn't understand at first. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I paid. No." He cut me off. "You didn't. You made a deal with someone else. Someone much worse than me." He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh, not really. It was more like the sound of a machine grinding to a halt, hollow and empty. "You should have read the fine print, my friend. You should have listened." I stood there, my mind racing. "What? Fine print?" I asked, my voice getting tight with panic. "The fine print," Varga repeated, his voice lower now. "The house always collects. You should have known that, but it's too late now." And then the line went dead. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the wet pavement, but I didn't care. The words echoed in my head over and over. The house always collects. It was then that I realized everything, every win, every turn of the cards, every roll of the dice. It was all part of a bigger game, a game that wasn't mine to play. The deal I had made with Silas, the one I thought I could control, it had strings that I couldn't see, that I couldn't break. And now, the house was coming to collect. I turned toward the alley behind the casino, the cold air biting at my skin, but I wasn't cold anymore. I was numb. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had been a part of something far worse than I'd ever imagined. Silas's smile, the way he had watched me win, the way he had slid that first whiskey toward me. It had all been a setup for something I couldn't understand, something I didn't want to understand. But I wasn't going to get the chance to back out. I heard footsteps behind me, soft and deliberate. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the dim streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. Silas. He was standing in the mouth of the alley, watching me like he had all the time in the world. His suit was unchanged, the pinstripes still sharp and clean even in the rain. But his smile was gone, replaced by something darker, something colder. He stepped toward me, and I could feel the air shift around him, like the temperature dropped a few degrees. The rain seemed to stop, the world around me growing unnaturally, still. "My favor," Silas said, his voice hollow, like it was coming from the deep end of an empty room. It wasn't the voice of the man who had slid a whiskey across the bar to me. It wasn't the voice of someone making a simple deal. No, this was the sound of something else. Something ancient. Something that had no concept of fairness, no concept of mercy. "I've been good to you," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "You've played the game well. But now, it's time to settle the score." A chill ran down my spine. My body screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't move. I was trapped in the gravity of his gaze, frozen in place by something I couldn't understand, something I had invited into my life by sitting down at that damn blackjack table. Silas took another step forward, and the air grew heavier, thicker, like it was pressing in on me. "You've won, Ethan," Silas said, his voice now echoing, as though it was bouncing off the walls of a vast, empty casino. "But the house always collects." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't need to. Not really. I could feel it. I could feel the change, the shift. Suddenly, I felt the familiar weight of the dice in my hand, the ones I had been playing with earlier, that night. I hadn't even noticed when I'd picked them up, but now they felt cold and heavy, like they had a mind of their own. My fingers curled around them, my hand shaking uncontrollably. Silas grinned, and I knew then, this was it. I had made my deal. The dice, my finger, my life. And as I felt the world slip away, as I felt myself losing the game, I knew Silas was still rolling the dice, and I was out of moves. I didn't have time to think. 1 second I was staring at Silas, his figure towering over me like some kind of dark prophet. And the next it was like everything else. Everything about the world I thought I knew was slipping away. The streetlights flickered out. The air around me grew thick, suffocating, and the only sound was the pounding of my heart. It wasn't the sound of rain anymore, wasn't the sound of a city alive with noise. It was just this deep, hollow thudding, like everything was collapsing inward on itself. Like I was about to fall through the cracks of reality. The dice in my hand were getting colder. I could feel them pulling at me, an invisible tether tightening around my wrist. My fingers were numb, but I still couldn't let go. The dice didn't belong to me anymore. They were a part of the game. The game I had agreed to play, whether I understood it or not. The deal had already been made, and I was in way too deep to turn back. "You can't cheat the house," Silas said, his voice low and thick like it was being dragged through wet sand. His grin never wavered, but now there was something feral in it, something predatory. "Not once the dice are rolling." The words barely made it through my fogged mind. "The house always collects." It echoed again and again in my head, over and over like a chant, and suddenly I realized what it meant. It wasn't just about luck or winning or losing, it was about me, about what I had become. The dice weren't just symbols of fate, they were my punishment. Every win, every stroke of luck had been borrowed from something dark, something far worse than Varga, something older and more powerful. I had made a deal with the devil, only I hadn't realized it until now. You've been playing your part. Ethan, Silas continued, stepping closer, his figure blotting out the dim light of the alley. But this is where the game ends. I swallowed hard, trying to say something, anything, but my throat was tight, my mouth dry. The words wouldn't come. I wanted to scream, wanted to beg for mercy, but deep down, I knew. There would be no mercy. There was no way out. My body felt like it was turning to stone. My legs wouldn't move, my hands wouldn't release the dice, and I could feel them in the pit of my stomach. Those things I had ignored for so long. The weight of the deal, the crushing weight of fate, the suffocating pressure of knowing. There was no escape from the consequences of my choices. I should have walked away, I whispered, my voice cracking with the weight of regret. I should have walked away when I had the chance. Silas didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of slot machines in the distance, the harsh metallic churning of coins, the sound that had filled my nightmares, the sound that had been there when I couldn't sleep, when I thought I was losing my mind. It was so close now, it was like it was inside my head, rattling my bones. The house was calling in its chips. I dropped to my knees, the cold, wet pavement biting at my skin. I wanted to scream again, but no sound came. My vision blurred. I could feel the dice tightening in my hand as if they were fusing with my skin, becoming a part of me, part of the game I had signed up for, part of the end game. I glanced up, through the haze of rain and shadows, and saw Silas's face. It wasn't a man's face anymore. It wasn't anything human. His features were distorted, stretched like melted wax, and his eyes, those deep, black pits, had swallowed everything. There was nothing left but darkness. "You've always known the price, Ethan," Silas said, his voice now a low hiss, like the sound of metal scraping against stone. "And now, you've paid it." I felt the cold spread through me, down my spine, into my chest, freezing my blood. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even feel the air in my lungs anymore. The dice had stopped being tools of luck. They were now the tools of fate. My fate. "Goodbye, Ethan," Silas whispered, and then he was gone like smoke fading into the night. I didn't know how long I sat there, my hand still clutching the dice, still frozen in place by whatever force had taken hold of me. The sound of slot machines, of coins spilling from a broken machine, was louder than ever. The world around me felt like it was bending, like reality was collapsing in on itself, and all I could do was sit there and watch it happen. And then, slowly, it began. The erasure. I saw my reflection in a nearby puddle, only it wasn't my reflection anymore. It was just an outline, a silhouette, with no features, no identity. I could see the rain and the water, but I couldn't see myself. I was fading. It was like the pieces of me were being pulled apart bit by bit, like I was a memory that had never existed in the first place. And somewhere, deep inside me, I knew it was over. The game wasn't just over for me. It was over for everyone. The house had collected. It's strange, isn't it? How a single place can live on in your memory no matter how many years pass, how far you go. Blackridge Elementary was one of those places. A nondescript brick building in the middle of Gallows Hollow. A town that had seen better days, decades ago. The mill had shut down long before I ever set foot in that school, and the town had become a hollow echo of what it once was. Empty streets, boarded-up shops, and the ever-present scent of rust in the air. But even with all of that, there was one thing that still lingered long after the rest had been forgotten. The story of the thing in the elm tree. We called it the Grinner. The name was a joke at first, a silly thing kids would whisper during recess when no teacher was around. It wasn't until years later that I realized just how wrong we were to laugh about it. And by then it was too late. We were already caught in the web of it. The tree stood behind the soccer field, old and gnarly, its branches twisted into unnatural angles. It was so big that it seemed to have swallowed up half the sky, its trunk thick and dark, covered in moss and crumbling bark. We used to joke that it was the oldest thing in town, but there was nothing funny about it when the sun went down. The story goes that it wasn't always a tree, that once it had been a man who worked at the old textile mill that had long since gone silent. He had a family, a wife, and a little boy, just like anyone else who worked those endless hours in the factory. Until the accident, the explosion, the way the mill's machinery had shredded him, and his head, they say, was crushed under the weight of a beam. But that wasn't the worst of it. No, the worst part was what happened after. The legend goes that his soul didn't leave this world. It stayed, trapped inside that tree. And in the hollow of the old elm, it transformed, twisted into something that wasn't quite human anymore, something that had become hungry for the souls of the living. And it wasn't just any hunger, it wanted to play. I don't know how it started, but over the years, kids started disappearing, just vanishing. No bodies, no explanations, only empty backpacks left behind, and eerie giggles echoing from the shadowy branches of the elm. The stories grew, warped by the mouths of children who had been too afraid to admit what they'd seen, too ashamed to admit that the things they whispered about were real. We thought it was just a tale, something we told to scare each other on Halloween, something to keep us up at night so we could have that safe thrill of fear. That is, until the day Ethan Vickers disappeared. Ethan wasn't like the other kids at Blackridge. He was quiet, withdrawn, with a mind that never seemed to leave his sketchbook, always drawing monsters, things with teeth, with claws, with too many eyes. He was one of those kids who never quite fit in, and that made him a target. He was easy to pick on, easy to push around. We used to shove him into lockers and call him names, all the usual middle school nonsense. It wasn't until his disappearance that I realized how wrong we were, how much we were responsible for what happened. Ethan was one of the kids who stayed, behind after school. He had detention that day, just like I did. But unlike me, Ethan stayed by the elm tree after the bell rang, hanging out by the base of it like he was waiting for something. I didn't think anything of it at first. I heard the rain start coming down in sheets, strange for June, but not impossible in Gallows Hollow. I never saw him walk away from the tree. No one did. The next morning, all we found was his backpack, drenched, sitting at the foot of that damn tree. His notebooks were inside, filled with sketches of that thing, the Grinner, its stitched smile, its long limbs reaching from the hollow of the tree. It was too late by then. Ethan was gone. I can still see the way the wind blew those blackened leaves through the air, the way they clung to the pavement, too heavy to float. There was something unnatural about it, even though I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. But now I can still hear the sound of those leaves scraping across the ground like the whispers of the thing in the tree, calling out for Ethan, calling for more. I should have said something. I should have told someone. But I didn't. None of us did. We just let it happen like we always did until it was too late. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized how much we had all ignored, how much we had laughed off. Because that night after Ethan disappeared, something followed me home. Something made its presence known. Something with a smile. 3 weeks passed after Ethan disappeared, but time didn't heal anything. Instead, it seemed to stretch, pulling each day into the next like wet cement. Everyone in school acted like everything was normal, like nothing had changed. But I knew better. I saw it in their eyes, the way they avoided the elm tree, the way the teachers fidgeted in their chairs when they thought no one was looking. They were all scared, but none of them would admit it. I tried to move on, tried to bury the fear beneath the regular humdrum of middle school. But that didn't work. You can't just push fear down into the pit of your stomach and expect it to stay there. I could feel it every time I walked by that tree, its twisted branches towering over the soccer field like a silent sentinel, watching. It wasn't just the others who felt it, though. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me wherever I went. At first, I thought it was just the anxiety of Ethan's disappearance, the guilt gnawing at me. But it wasn't just that. It was something more real, something I couldn't explain. One afternoon, I stayed late for detention. The rest of the school long emptied out. I hated the quiet of the hallways when the others were gone, the kind of silence that was always just a little too thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was after 4:30 when I finally left the classroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The sun had already started to dip, casting long shadows across the pavement. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and I could hear the faint rattle of wind picking up. The rain hadn't come yet, but it was coming. I could feel it in the air. As I walked toward the parking lot, I passed the soccer field, and that's when I heard it. A laugh. It wasn't a normal laugh. It wasn't a kid's laugh, full of joy and carelessness. This one was broken, like something had torn it apart. It was wet, hollow, and I could hear it echoing in the distance. But the sound didn't come from far away. It came from just beyond the soccer field. The old elm tree. My stomach churned. For a moment, I told myself it was just the wind, the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it again. Louder this time. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself I was being paranoid. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was waiting for me. I looked toward the tree, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, shifting in the growing dusk. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw the shape more clearly. A figure standing still beneath the twisted branches of the elm, almost camouflaged by the dark bark. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its limbs were long and thin, stretching like branches themselves. Its face, God, I'll never forget its face, was a mess of raw, chewed-up skin, a mouth stitched into a grin that stretched from ear to ear. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It was wrong. And then it moved. Not the way a person moves, but like something that didn't understand how to walk properly, slow, jerking movements like it was still trying to get the hang of being alive. Its fingers twitched, long and knotted like rope, and with each motion I could hear a faint scraping sound like bone dragging against wood. I froze, my heart slamming against my chest, the blood draining from my face. I should have run. I should have turned around and sprinted out of there, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as the thing stepped forward, its head tilting slightly like it was studying me. Then, the voice came, low and gurgling, like it was struggling to form words. "Ethan misses you," it said, its voice like a chorus of whispers, each one more broken than the last. "He wants you to come play in the dark." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, my feet rooted to the ground, my mind a mess of panic and disbelief. The thing took another step, its long fingers reaching out, as if it was about to touch me. But before it could, I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I ran until my legs burned, until I could feel my breath tearing at my chest. The sound of the thing's voice echoed behind me, each step heavier than the last, but I couldn't stop. I didn't stop until I crashed into the door of the principal's office, panting, my heart in my throat. Mrs. Jenkins stared at me like I was insane, but I couldn't explain, not with words. She just called my parents, told them I needed to calm down, that it was probably just the stress of everything that had happened to Ethan. They didn't believe me. No one did. I thought I was losing my mind. But when I got home that night, I found something in my room, a drawing. It was on the back of one of my notebooks, a page I didn't remember filling out. A sketch of the elm tree. No, not just the tree. The thing standing next to it. The grinner. The grin stretched wider in the drawing, so wide it looked like it was going to tear itself apart, and underneath, in jagged handwriting, it said, "You're next." That's when I knew. Whatever had happened to Ethan, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The nightmares started that night. At first, they were fragments, disjointed images, flashes of the grinner standing by my bed, its too wide smile creeping closer, its fingers dragging across the floor like a scratching board. But it didn't take long for them to become more vivid, more real. In every dream, the grinner was there, watching me, waiting. And every time I tried to scream, I couldn't. My voice was locked in my throat, frozen by the sheer terror that gripped my chest. I would wake up gasping for air, my sheets tangled around me, and my heart thumping in my ears like a drumbeat. The fear would linger even as I tried to shake off the remnants of sleep. But it wasn't just in my dreams. It was in my waking hours, too. The next day, I could feel its presence. It hovered just beneath my skin, pressing in from all sides, making it hard to think, hard to focus. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't sit still. Every time I looked out the window, my eyes would flick to the elm tree, standing out there like an ancient sentinel. I could almost see the thing behind it, watching me from the shadows. I could feel its eyes on me, like it was waiting for the right moment to come for me. I tried to push it down, tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, that everything was fine. But that's the thing about fear. It doesn't go away when you tell it to. It's like a shadow that stretches longer and longer until it overtakes everything. By the time I got home from school, my nerves were shot. My mom noticed, of course. She always did. She asked if I was okay, if I was still worried about Ethan, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. I couldn't tell her that I wasn't just scared of Ethan's disappearance. I was scared of what had taken him, what was still out there. That night after dinner, I went straight to my room. I didn't want to be near anyone, I just needed some space. I slammed the door behind me, trying to block out the world, but it didn't help. The house felt different, like the walls were pressing in on me, suffocating me. And then, I heard the giggling. It wasn't like the childish giggles I heard at school or the laugh of someone who was just messing around. This was broken, warped, like it was trying to come out of a throat that wasn't meant for laughter, wet and unnatural. It came from the backyard. The backyard was dark, just a thin strip of grass and a small wooden fence that led out to the alleyway. It was the perfect place for things to hide, for things to wait. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The giggling wasn't coming from the tree this time. It was closer. I could feel my body go cold as the sound grew louder, closer, until it was just outside my window. I couldn't move. I didn't want to. I knew if I moved, if I even made a sound, it would hear me, and that's when it would come. The giggling stopped abruptly, and for a long moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl, the kind that felt wrong. Knew it was there. I knew the grinner was outside my window just waiting. I tried to breathe, tried to calm my racing heart, but it was impossible. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to do something, anything, but I couldn't. My body refused to cooperate. And then, I heard it. The scrape of wood against the window. Someone, was dragging its fingers along the outside of my window just a few inches from my face. I could feel the vibrations through the wall, feel the weight of its touch pressing against the glass. I couldn't look. I couldn't bring myself to do it, but the sound was unmistakable. It wasn't human. And that's when I realized something. The grinner wasn't just waiting for me to come to it. It was coming to me. It was coming for me. Right? Then and there, like it had already decided I was its next target. With my heart hammering in my chest, I grabbed my phone off my desk, dialing my dad's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before he answered. "Hello? Dad, please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Please, you have to come home. I think it's here. The thing, the grinner. It's outside my window." There was a long pause, and then my dad's voice, thick with disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about, son? It's just some stupid school legend." "No, it's real," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I saw it, I heard it. It's outside my window, I swear it's here." Another pause, and then a voice, I barely recognized. "I'm coming," my dad said, his tone hard and serious. "Don't move, don't open the window, don't do anything until I get there, understand?" I didn't even have the chance to respond before the line went dead. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I just sat there staring at the window, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for something that felt inevitable. And then I saw it. A shadow. Tall and thin. Its limbs unnaturally long. It passed by my window, slow and deliberate, its fingers dragging against the glass like it was testing the strength of the barrier between us. And then I heard its voice. "Ethan misses you," it whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "He wants you to come play in the dark." I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. It was right there, right outside, waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen, just waiting for my dad to come and pull me out of this nightmare. Except he didn't come. Not in time. Because as I sat there, paralyzed with fear, the grinner's voice came again, this time closer, louder, more insistent. And that's when the window shattered. The glass fell in a cascade of sharp, brittle shards, each one a jagged reminder that the nightmare I was trying to outrun had just come crashing through my window. The sound of it echoed through my room, mixing with the beat of my heart, which was pounding in my ears like a drum. My breath was short, too shallow. My fingers curled into the blanket beneath me, trying to hold on to something, anything that wasn't a nightmare. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Everything in me was frozen, locked in place, staring at the gaping hole in my window. Beyond it, nothing but the dark. The air felt colder, sharper, like it was pressing in from all sides. I didn't dare blink. Through the dark, I saw something shift. It was slow, like it didn't care if I noticed or not. A shadow stretched across the lawn, stretching impossibly long, impossibly thin, until I could make out the outline of something. Or someone, too tall for a person, too long, its arms hanging down like they were reaching for the ground. The smile, the grin, was the first thing I saw. That twisted, stitched mouth pulled wide as though it was too eager to show me what was behind it. Then I heard it. The laughter. Not the playful giggle of a kid sneaking around at night, but a broken, wet sound that made my skin crawl. The kind of laugh you hear in the deepest part of a bad dream. The kind of laugh that wraps around your throat and chokes you from the inside out. "Ethan misses you." The voice rasped again, like it was speaking from the depths of some hollow space. "He wants you to come play in the dark." I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped in this moment, held there by a force I couldn't even begin to understand. I heard my dad's voice on the phone earlier. He'd promised he was coming. He'd said he'd be there. But I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to trust anymore. The grinner was here. Whatever it was, whatever nightmare it had pulled itself out of, was real, and it wasn't going to stop. The shadow in front of the window was moving now. Slow steps that creaked like old wood underfoot. Its limbs hung at impossible angles, like the bones inside it were broken and reset in the wrong way. The smile stretched wider, too wide. I could almost hear the stitches straining, hear them trying to keep its face intact as it grinned at me. Its fingers twitched, nails scraping against the ground like claws on stone. And then, in the next moment, it was there. At the edge of my bed. I didn't hear it move. There was no sound, no warning, just the dark presence filling the room. I could feel the cold of it seeping into my skin, soaking through my bones like it was reaching inside me. The room felt smaller, suffocating. I was hyper-aware of every single breath I took, as if each one could be my last. The grinner leaned down, its face coming closer and closer, its eyes two black holes in the center of its deformed face. Its grin was so wide now, I could see its teeth, too many teeth, sharp and jagged like they'd been torn out and replaced by something twisted, something wrong. "Don't run," it croaked. "You'll never outrun me, not this time." I didn't want to look into its eyes, but something inside me made me do it. I had to see what it was. I had to know what it wanted. But when I looked, I didn't see eyes at all. just hollows, empty, black holes where its eyes should have been. Its face was a twisted mask, its features stitched together with thick black thread. There was nothing human left in it. Only the thing. Only the monster. I wanted to shut my eyes. I wanted to block it out. But I couldn't. And then it spoke again. Its voice wet and grating. "Ethan's waiting for you." I knew it. I knew I was next. Ethan, my friend who disappeared weeks ago, wasn't gone. He was inside the grinner. The thing that took him was feeding on him, using his face to lure me in. That twisted grin was his. Those hollow eyes. His eyes. I could feel it, like it was crawling under my skin. The moment I looked at it, the thing started to drag me in. Piece by piece. I wasn't sure where the grinner ended and where I began. I was just a part of it now. A part of whatever darkness had bled into this place. Then the phone rang. I jumped, startled, my body frozen, heart skipping in fear. It was the one thing that snapped me out of the trance, the phone. My dad's voice should have been on the other side of that line. He promised he'd be here. I grabbed the phone, desperate for the comfort of something familiar, anything that might make this nightmare stop. I could barely breathe as I picked it up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Hello?" I rasped, my voice a strangled whisper. The line crackled. It sounded like static, like there was something on the other side, something breathing. A wet, heavy sound. And then came the voice. It was familiar but wrong, distorted. "Ethan misses you," it whispered, the voice broken and gurgling. "Come play. He's waiting." I felt the tears sting my eyes, the panic setting in. My dad. He should have been here by now. But when I looked up, I didn't see my dad. I saw Ethan, or what was left of him. He was standing in the doorway, his face twisted into that sickening grin, his eyes hollow, just like the grinner's. His limbs were too long, stretching down to the floor, his body folded unnaturally like it didn't fit right in this world anymore. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought I saw the flicker of recognition in his dead eyes. Then he smiled, and that's when I knew I was never getting out of this. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare at Ethan, or what used to be him, standing in the doorway, that grin stretching across his face. It wasn't him anymore. Whatever had taken him, twisted him, had erased the last pieces of Ethan that made him human. And now whatever it was here for me. I looked at the phone, still gripped tightly in my hand. The static on the line had stopped, but the laughter lingered in my ears, a constant hum that made my stomach churn. The only thing I could hear now was my own heart pounding in my chest, like a drum, telling me that I was running out of time. My dad, he was supposed to save me. He'd promised he would save me, but it felt like hours had passed since I'd last heard from him. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my vision beginning to blur from fear. Ethan, the thing in his body, took a step forward. It was slow, deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. It didn't need to rush. It was patient. It had time. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to make a sound, but no words came. My voice was trapped inside me. Every instinct told me to get out, but my body wouldn't obey. The fear was so thick I could taste it, like metal on my tongue. Ethan, or whatever it was, now took another step. It was close now. Too close. "Don't be afraid," it gurgled, its voice like wet paper tearing. "Ethan's here. He's waiting. We're waiting." I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up, to make it stop. But when I opened them, nothing had changed. The grinner's smile widened, the black thread of its stitched mouth straining as it pulled its lips further back, revealing teeth that were too large, too sharp to be anything natural. The darkness in its eyes seemed to stretch beyond the room, as if it was pulling the world into itself. Behind it, in the dim light, I could see the shadows move. They weren't just shadows anymore, they were shapes. Too many of them. Too many of them, all with that same stitched grin, all waiting. I could feel it now. The hunger. My breath was coming in short bursts, my vision flickering in and out. I was dizzy, lightheaded, as though I was losing control of my body. The temperature in the room dropped, and I felt like I was choking on the cold. But it wasn't just the cold that was suffocating me. It was the fear, the darkness, the thing that had taken my friend, that had followed him into the hollow of... That tree now wanted me. It wanted me to join it, to become part of the twisted, stitched thing that had once been Ethan. I'm not... I tried to say, but my voice cracked, coming out like a whisper. "You're exactly what we need," it crooned, the voice scraping against my skull, each word like claws against the inside of my mind. "You're part of the game now. You can't escape." I thought of my dad, of the hope I had clung to when he told me he was coming. I wanted to believe that he would be here any second, that he would come crashing through that door, crowbar in hand, ready to fight this thing. But that thought was slipping away. It felt distant now, impossible. I stumbled back, my legs shaky, desperate to find something to hold on to, but there was nothing. Nothing but the walls, closing in. My head was spinning. Then the phone rang again. This time I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. It rang once, twice, and then the static broke through, the voice on the other end distorted. "He's waiting." I felt the chill of the phone against my ear, and that's when I knew. I knew there was no one coming for me. I didn't know how much time passed after that. Time had stopped being a thing to me. The room felt like it was getting smaller. The walls pressing in, and I was suffocating on the air. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps outside, moving fast, shaking the ground beneath me. The door to my room, still cracked open from earlier, swung wide. My heart leapt into my throat, but it wasn't my dad. It wasn't the help I'd been praying for. It was another shape, its tall form silhouetted by the hallway light. It was human. It looked human, but it wasn't. It had that same twisted grin, the same stitched smile that stretched across its face like the others. It was one of them. "You didn't think you were getting out, did you?" The voice rasped. It wasn't Ethan's voice anymore. It was something far worse. "You're just like him now. You're just like us." I didn't have time to think. The thing lunged, and I was too slow to move. My body slammed against the wall, my head spinning, as the grinner's hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing tighter and tighter until I could feel my chest tightening, the breath choking out of me. And then, in that instant, I remembered. I remembered the stories, the warnings, the tales of the grinner and its victims. They didn't die, not like normal people. They became part of it. The thing that lived in the tree, the thing that took children and twisted them into something else. Something that lived in the dark, smiled forever. The smile was the last thing I saw before everything went black. When the morning came, there was no trace of me, no sign of Ethan, no sign of anyone. The town of Gallows Hollow would go on as if nothing ever happened. The grinner would wait and the children would forget until it was their turn, and one by one they'd join the dark and smile. It had been years since I'd let myself even think about dating. After my divorce, I'd thrown myself into motherhood and work, pretending I didn't care about companionship or love or anything other than keeping my head above water. It was easier that way. Safer. But Lily and Emma, my two girls, deserved more. They deserved a mother who could smile again, who could go out and be someone other than the woman who picked them up from school in her pajamas, exhausted and frayed, at the edges. They deserved a mother who wasn't afraid of a life outside the four walls of our little house in Blackthorn Hollow. And so, after months of quiet desperation, I decided to take a chance. I downloaded the app, HeartLink, a dating app specifically for single parents. The name was cheesy, but I figured it couldn't hurt to give it a shot. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a connection, someone to talk to, someone to remind me there was a world out there beyond my little bubble. That's when I met Daniel. His profile picture was of him standing on top of a mountain, a forest stretching behind him. He had a warm smile, dark eyes, and an easygoing demeanor. His bio was simple. Teacher, hiker, lover of adventure. Let's explore the world together. No red flags, no weird cryptic messages, just someone who seemed normal, like a guy you'd meet in the grocery store and never think twice about. Our conversation started easy, casual. He told me about his job teaching high school history. I told him about my girls, Lily, the quiet but sharp one, and Emma, the bubbly, inquisitive, little firecracker. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I said, asking about their favorite books, their hobbies, their little quirks. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. After a week of texting back and forth, he asked me out for dinner. But then, just before the date, he suggested something a little more adventurous. "How about I pick you up and we go to Blackthorn Park for a picnic?" he proposed. I thought it might be nice to get out into nature a bit. I hesitated. Blackthorn Park was beautiful, but it was secluded, a bit too remote for my comfort, especially when it came to going out with someone I barely knew. But Daniel was persistent, and I felt a strange trust toward him. Maybe I was just desperate for some normalcy, some connection, or maybe I was just looking for an excuse to escape my routine. "I'll pick you up around 5, Daniel said, his voice warm and inviting through the phone. "We'll keep it casual, I promise." So I agreed. When he showed up at the house that evening, I was nervous but excited. It had been so long since I'd done something for myself without worrying about the kids. Lily and Emma were busy in the living room, lost in their books, which I took as a good sign. They were usually a bit wary of anyone new, especially men, but tonight they seemed distracted. Then Daniel knocked on the door, a little earlier than expected. I opened it, and there he stood, holding a bouquet of wildflowers and wearing a soft blue shirt and khaki pants, looking the part of the perfect date. He had a calm, collected air about him, the kind of man you might expect to see leading a class of eager teenagers or hiking the Appalachian Trail. My first instinct was to smile, to let him in, but something about his presence made me hesitate. Lily and Emma came running up behind me, their eyes wide. They froze in the doorway, and I noticed a strange, unspoken tension pass between them. Lily, who was usually quiet and shy, clutched my sleeve tightly. Emma looked up at Daniel with wide, curious eyes. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "His smile is wrong." I laughed, brushing it off. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" But then I looked at him. Really looked. His smile was too wide, almost too perfect. There was something off about it. Too many teeth. Too much of a grin that stretched unnaturally, like it didn't belong on a human face. It was fleeting, just a flash of discomfort, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe it was just nerves. After all, he seemed nice enough. I smiled and turned to my daughters. "It's just Daniel, girls. He's a friend." But they didn't seem convinced. Emma glanced up at me, her little face scrunched with unease, while Lily just stared at Daniel, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Okay, well, we're heading out," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "You two behave and don't stay up too late. I'll be back before you know it." With that, I turned and stepped out onto the porch, Daniel following close behind. I could still feel the weight of the girls' eyes on us, like they were watching, waiting for something. I shook my head again, trying to push the feeling of unease aside. As we drove off into the rain-slicked streets of Blackthorn Hollow, I caught one last glimpse of Lily in the window, her small hands pressed against the glass, her face pale, her lips parted in silent warning. The drive to Blackthorn Park was oddly quiet. Daniel, a good conversationalist over text, had fallen strangely silent in the car. The steady hum of the tires on the wet pavement filled the air, a soft white noise that seemed to drown out any attempts at conversation. I glanced at him, trying to gauge his mood, but he was focused on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. We drove deeper into the woods, away from the heart of town, the streetlights growing sparse, and the shadows from the trees growing, longer like reaching fingers. The rain had let up, leaving the world drenched in heavy, damp stillness. A cold wind stirred through the branches overhead, making the trees creak and groan. My stomach twisted with unease. "So," I said, trying to fill the silence, "how did you end up in Blackthorn Hollow? I didn't think there were many teaching jobs here." Daniel glanced at me, his smile flickering back on his lips, though it still felt a little too wide, too practiced. "I moved here a few years ago, was looking for a quieter place. I needed something different, a fresh start." I nodded, unsure of what to make of his answer. I wanted to press him more, to ask what exactly he was running from, but I held back. It wasn't the time to dig into his past, not on our first date. But something about his tone made my skin crawl. He didn't say much about himself. He wasn't forthcoming, but he wasn't evasive either. It was like he wanted me to believe in the person he pretended to be. "Here we are," Daniel announced as we turned off the paved road and onto a dirt path, the headlights illuminating the entrance to Blackthorn Park. It was a quiet, isolated spot, the kind of place people came to if they didn't want to be found. Hesitated as we pulled into the clearing near a set of dilapidated picnic tables under the gnarled branches of ancient oaks. The park felt abandoned, old, and forgotten. The moss-covered benches and broken swings in the distance gave off a sense of decay. It was the kind of place where children's laughter should echo but didn't, where the smell of old rain mixed with the musty scent of decay. Daniel parked the car and got out before I could respond, moving with a quickness that startled me. I grabbed my purse and followed him, my boots sinking slightly into the soggy ground as I made my way toward the picnic table. He set a wicker basket down with a flourish, then began to unpack it, his movements smooth and assured, almost too practiced. The checkered cloth he lifted didn't show sandwiches or fresh fruit like I expected. No. Instead, it revealed several pieces of raw meat, red, glistening, still pink at the edges, sitting in the bottom of the basket like some macabre offering. My stomach lurched. I forced a smile, but I couldn't help the queasy feeling bubbling up inside me. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought we were having a picnic, not this." Daniel's grin stretched wider, if that was even possible. He shrugged, unfazed. "Homemade," he said, his voice smooth like honey too. Smooth. "I thought I'd bring something a little different. It's my special recipe." I stared at the meat, my mind racing. I couldn't even name what kind of meat it was. Beef? Pork? The color of it looked wrong. Something about it didn't sit right, like it had been marinated in something that made it glisten in a way that felt unnatural. The air seemed to close in around me, thick with the smell of the wet earth, the dampness of the leaves, and now the strange, sickly sweetness of the meat. The picnic table creaked as Daniel shifted closer, his hand lingering near the basket. He reached for a piece of the meat with a pair of tongs, but I quickly stepped back. "Daniel, this isn't okay," I said, trying to make my voice sound firm, though it was shaking. Before I could finish my sentence, Daniel's hand shot out, gripping my wrist tightly, his fingers like iron. "Come on," he said, his smile never faltering, though his voice had changed. It was no longer smooth, but sharper, colder. "Don't be so shy, Maggie. You don't want to hurt my feelings, do you? It's just a picnic, a little fun." I yanked my wrist free, the sudden pressure of his grip leaving a dull ache in my skin. His smile grew, unnervingly wide, as if the suggestion of me rejecting him only fueled him more. I tried to breathe, tried to keep my composure, but my heart was racing now, pounding against my ribs like it wanted to break free. The air felt thick, with something, tension or maybe danger. I had no idea. "So," he continued, his voice soft but insistent, "do your girls sleep through the night? Or do they get scared easily? Maybe they've seen something they shouldn't have. You wouldn't want them to be afraid, would you?" His voice dropped lower as if speaking to himself. I stepped back from him, my eyes wide. What "What are you talking about, Daniel?" He ignored my question, instead reaching into his coat pocket with slow deliberation. His fingers twitched like they were itching to grab something, but he didn't pull it out yet. I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes flickered toward my car in the distance. "What's your address again?" he asked, his tone suddenly light, casual, as if he was asking for the time. "I was thinking of sending Lily and Emma a little gift. A surprise, for being so cute." I knew something was terribly wrong. That smile, the way he was watching me, the bizarre questions. This wasn't a date. It wasn't even a picnic. This was a trap. I took a step back, but before I could turn to leave, Daniel's hand darted out again, catching my elbow with a grip that was too tight. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice too calm, too quiet. We were just getting started. My breath caught in my throat, my instincts screaming at me to run. The raw meat, the questions, the strange smile. It all came together in a sickening way. This man wasn't who he said he was, and I was no longer safe. I had to get out of there. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears as I yanked my arm from Daniel's grip. I didn't care if he saw the panic in my eyes. I didn't care if he thought I was overreacting. The warning signs were flashing too brightly now, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I took a half step back, then another, and when I saw the space between us, I knew I had to make a choice. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the suffocating stillness of the woods, the rot of the picnic table beneath my feet. But the car was a few dozen yards away. That's where I had to go. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking, despite my attempt to steady it. I'm not hungry. I think I'm gonna head home." The words came out louder than I intended, more forceful than I thought I could muster. But there was no mistaking the resolve in them. His expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Something darker. The smile that had been plastered across his face now felt too tight, like it was stretching him thin. "Maggie," he said, his voice taking on a strange, almost mocking tone. "Don't go. We were just getting started. The night's young." I shook my head, slowly backing away. "I need to go. My girls are waiting for me. I waved a hand at the picnic, the basket, the eerie woods surrounding us. "This isn't right. I can't do this." Daniel's lips twitched as though he was trying to suppress a smile that wasn't quite normal. His eyes seemed to lose focus, like he was seeing something beyond me, beyond the picnic. "You're making a mistake, Maggie," he said, his voice still light. But there was something colder underneath, something more menacing. And then I saw it. Just a fraction of a second too late, his hand slipping into his coat pocket. I didn't wait to find out what he was reaching for. I turned and bolted. The sound of my boots hitting the wet ground was drowned out by the frantic thud of my heartbeat. My legs screamed as I pushed them faster, harder. But I didn't dare look back. All I knew was that I had to get to the car. The trees around me seemed to close in, their gnarled branches twisting like fingers, casting shadows that danced menacingly in the dim light. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the earthy scent of wet leaves and something rotten, familiar. It was almost as if the woods themselves were urging me to stop, to slow down. But I couldn't. I refused to. When I reached the car, my hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys. The cold metal felt alien in my grip, but I managed to get the door open and slam it shut behind me. I was breathless, trembling, my mind racing. I threw the car into reverse and floored the pedal, sending gravel spraying as the tires screamed against the dirt. I glanced up at the rearview mirror just as the headlights bounced over a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Daniel. For a split second, I swore I saw his smile. That smile. Widen. Stretching even further than before. His face almost inhuman, his eyes gleaming in the low light. But then I slammed the car into drive and sped out of the park, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as I forced myself to focus on the road. I didn't care what he looked like. I didn't care what he was doing. I needed to get home. I needed to get to my girls. The drive felt endless, the trees blurring past in my peripheral vision, the faint thud of my tires the only sound in the car. The lights of the town came into view, the familiar shapes of the streetlights casting their weak glow over the rain-slicked pavement. I didn't slow down as I crossed the town line. I didn't stop until I was parked in front of my house, the engine still running, the warmth of the car cocooning me in a false sense of safety. But as I stepped out, the sense of relief began to fade. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me, and found Lily and Emma sitting on the couch in the living room, watching cartoons. They looked up at me, their faces blank, as if they'd been waiting for me. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the TV. "He's here." My stomach dropped. Before I could react, a loud bang echoed from the back door. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I knew that sound. Someone banging against the door trying to get in. The shadows outside the windows felt darker than before. I rushed to the back door, double locking it before I ran upstairs to check on the girls. But as I glanced out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line, was Daniel. His smile was stretched wide, his eyes shining with that same eerie gleam from the park. He waved, and then, as if to make sure I saw, he tilted his head to one side, just enough for the faint outline of something in the dark to shift behind him. Something tall, something moving slowly just out of the corner of my vision. My heart raced. The sound of a car pulling up in the driveway made me whirl around, but the figure in the window was gone. My eyes darted from the window back to the girls. They hadn't moved. Lily's eyes were wide, her lips trembling. Emma, younger and less aware of the danger, had her head buried in her blanket. I hurried to the front door, peering cautiously through the peephole. But I didn't see anything. No cars, no Daniel. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was horribly wrong. The wind howled down the street, carrying with it a faint, distant sound of laughter. It wasn't Emma's. It wasn't Lily's. It was someone else's. And it was coming from the woods. The cops showed up 23 minutes after I called. That might not sound long, but try staring into the woods for 23 minutes, knowing he's out there somewhere, maybe already in your house. Every floorboard creak made me jump. Every shadow looked like him. I held my daughters tight, on the couch, one arm around each of them, like I could keep them safe with just my body and sheer will. When the squad car finally pulled into the driveway, lights flashing red and blue against the rain-soaked street, I nearly cried from relief. Officer Denton, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes and a no-nonsense tone, was the first out of the car. He tapped on the glass with the butt of his flashlight. "Ms. Voss," he called, peering in. I opened the door so fast I almost knocked him backward. "He's here," I blurted out. "Daniel, or whatever his name is. He was watching the house from the woods. I saw him. My daughter saw him. He brought a basket to our date, with raw meat. He asked if my girls slept through the night." Officer Denton's partner, a younger woman named Jenkins, moved past me into the house, scanning with her flashlight. Denton gave me a measured look. "We'll search the property. You and the girls stay inside." I nodded quickly, locking the door behind them as they disappeared into the night. Minutes passed. I kept the girls upstairs, away from the windows. I wanted to believe we were safe now that the police were here. But something inside me, still, felt off. Like the house itself was holding its breath. Then came the yell. "He's in the shed," Jenkins shouted. I heard the clatter of boots, a loud thud, and then a grunt, followed by shouting, swearing, and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. A few more officers arrived, one with a K-9 unit, and before long, Daniel, or whoever he really was dragged from the backyard in handcuffs, shirt torn, a scratch down one side of his face. But his expression? He was smiling. That same too-wide grin, like he'd just pulled off a practical joke no one else understood. "You're gonna regret this," he said as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. We were just getting started. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask what the hell he meant, but Denton pulled me aside before I could. "We found some concerning items," he said, his face pale. "In the shed." He had a butcher knife tucked in his belt, and the car smells like bleach. There's a plastic tarp in the trunk, and we found zip ties, duct tape, rope, a shovel too. And this? He held up the wicker picnic basket, the same one from earlier. It was no longer carefully arranged. It had spilled open during the scuffle, revealing the raw meat I remembered. But now I could see it wasn't just meat. There were bones, small ones. Animal, maybe. I prayed they were animal. I just met him a week ago, I stammered. His name's Daniel Reeves. He said he's a teacher at Oak Hill Middle School. He seemed normal. Denton shook his head slowly. We ran his plates and checked the name. Daniel Reeves doesn't exist. The photos he used on the app? Stolen? That car? Registered under a different name. Fake, too. It's all a fabrication. It felt like the ground dropped out from under me. You're lucky, Ms. Voss, he said quietly. Whatever his plan was, it wasn't good. Later that night, after the police left, after I finally convinced the girls to sleep in my room, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I couldn't bring myself to drink. I scrolled back through my text thread with Daniel. The texts had vanished, every message, every emoji, every photo, gone. Like he'd never been there. That's when I noticed something even worse. My location sharing, still active, still sent to him. But the number listed wasn't his anymore, it was untraceable, just a string of random digits. I turned off my phone, my hands shaking. It was over, I told myself. He was in custody. But that night, as I lay in bed with Lily curled into me and Emma snoring softly on my other side, I heard something outside. Not loud, just the soft rustle of leaves, a creak of a gate. I forced myself up, pulled back the curtain, just an inch. At the far edge of the yard, near the start of the woods, something moved, a shape. It didn't step forward. It didn't wave, but it smiled. Not Daniel, something else. Teeth too long, face too still, and it was watching. It's been 2 weeks since they arrested the man calling himself Daniel Reeves. 2 weeks of nightmares of sleeping with the lights on, of waking to every creak and whisper of the old house groaning against the wind. 2 weeks of Lily and Emma clinging to me so tight in the dark, I wondered if they'd ever feel safe again. But the thing is, I don't think they will, because neither do I. The police said he's in custody waiting for trial. They assured me he can't hurt us now. Officer Denton even came by with his coffee breath and awkward kindness, promising extra patrols on Willow Lane. But none of that stopped what happened the night after the arrest. It started with Lily. She woke me up just after 3 a.m., shaking me gently, whispering like she didn't want to be heard by the wrong thing. Mom, he's in my room. I shot up, heart already pounding. Emma slept soundly next to me. I grabbed the bat I kept under the bed, the same one I used to keep in the garage for softball practice, and followed Lily into her room. Nothing. The window was locked. The closet was empty. Just her drawings taped to the walls and a few stuffed animals on the bed. I hugged her, told her it was a bad dream, and tucked her in again. But as I turned to leave, I saw it. Not in the room. In the reflection of the hallway mirror, just for a second, too quick for my brain to fully process. Something was standing behind me. No sound, no breath. Just that smile, the one Lily had described. Too wide, too many teeth. When I spun around, it was gone. I stood there shaking for what felt like hours before finally going back to bed. The next morning, Lily had drawn it. Black crayon on white paper. Thick teeth, lips stretched to the cheeks. Big, empty eyes. The words she wrote at the bottom in blocky letters made my stomach twist. Not him. The other one. I didn't know what she meant. Not Daniel. Who was it then? That day I dug deeper. I went back on HeartLink, made a burner account. I searched for the profile Daniel used. Gone. I reverse image searched his pictures. They came from an obituary. Man named Thomas Green, died 6 years ago in a car crash outside Chicago. Whoever I went on that picnic with, he used the face of a dead man. I took the girls to my sister's house in the next county. Said it was a break from the stress, but really I needed to think. That night, my sister's dog wouldn't stop growling at the sliding door. Nothing there. Just the woods behind her house, familiar trees, same black branches twisting like arms, reaching in. The smile kept showing up. Reflections, windows. Even in the puddle near my car one rainy morning, I saw it just behind my shoulder. Not a man, not human. Something else. Something wearing his shape. The last straw came when Emma started sleep-talking. She'd never done it before. I woke up to her whispering, "He's under the house, Mommy. He's waiting in the dirt. He says you're his favorite." We went back home after that. I thought maybe it was all in my head, that the trauma had done something to us, that if I just acted normal again, this would fade. But on the 7th night back, I got the call. A blocked number. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. Nothing at first. Just static. Then the voice. Wet and slow. "You didn't say goodbye?" "Maggie." I dropped the phone. Threw it across the room. Cops traced the call. No source. It came from nowhere. Literally. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the dark backyard through the sliding door. And he was there. Not Daniel. Not even a man. Something stretched wrong. Too tall. Skin too smooth. Mouth pulled open like someone had forgotten how to make a human face. And behind him in the woods, others, watching, smiling. When I blinked, they were gone. Now I don't talk to strangers. I don't go outside after sunset. I've pulled the girls out of school, started homeschooling. We keep the curtains drawn, the doors locked, but some nights the lights flicker and always the woods smile back. Because you can delete a profile, you can catch a man, but you can't stop something that never needed a name. And I think I brought it home. It was just past midnight when it started. The hammering. Not the usual creaks and groans that old houses make when the wind picks up, but something more violent, more insistent. The sound of fists pounding against the front door, relentless and frantic. It shook the entire house, rattling the windows and making the old oaks outside groan in response to the gusts of wind. I jumped up from the couch, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. My 2 sons, Alex and Noah, were already asleep upstairs. I had been curled up reading a book, trying to unwind after a long day of work. But that noise, it wouldn't let me ignore it. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. Maybe a couple of kids being stupid. But when I crept to the window and peered through the peephole, my stomach turned over. There, standing on the porch, was a girl no older than 16, her clothes drenched, her hair plastered to her face, and her eyes wide with fear. She was pounding on the door with her fists, not knocking, but hammering as though her life depended on it. "Please, he's after me," she sobbed, her voice barely audible over the wind and rain. Her hands pressed against the glass, leaving bloody smears on the door as if she had been running through the woods, desperately trying to escape something. Or someone. "He's going to kill me." The girl's words hit me like a punch to the gut. My fingers hovered over the deadbolt, my heart racing, my mind a whirl of confusion. I had never seen her before, and something about the way she was acting felt off. Too desperate, too practiced. I glanced over my shoulder. My youngest son, Noah, standing in the hallway behind me, his wide eyes full of fear. "Stay right there, Noah," I whispered, keeping my voice steady. I couldn't let him sense how scared I was. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the decision. I wanted to help. I wanted to believe this girl. She was terrified, and she sounded so convincing. But there was something in the back of my mind telling me that I couldn't trust her. Something wasn't right. I swallowed hard, my hand shaking, as I picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Hello, yes, I need help. There's a girl at my door. She says someone's after her. I don't know what's going on. I'm home alone with my kids," I said, my voice clipped, my throat dry. I kept my eyes locked on the girl through the peephole as I spoke. She was still there, her face now twisted with frustration, her breath fogging up the glass. She looked up, and for the first time she seemed to notice my hesitation. "No, don't call anyone," she screamed, her voice rising with panic. "He'll hear you. Just let me in, please." I froze. The desperation in her voice had shifted, and something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. It was too sharp, too practiced. I felt my blood run cold, my instincts kicking in. I couldn't open the door. I couldn't let her in. "I'm calling the police," I said firmly, my fingers trembling as I pressed the phone against my ear. I could hear the dispatcher on the other end, trying to calm me down, asking for my location. But I couldn't take my eyes off the girl. She stood still now, her face blank as if all the emotion had drained from her. Her mouth curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. And then, through the sheets of rain and the howling wind, I saw it. A flashlight beam cutting through the darkness from the woods beyond the driveway. It moved erratically, as if someone was stumbling through the trees, making their way toward the house. The girl's lips twisted into a grin. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice colder now, like she had known all along what would happen. A shiver ran down my spine. Something was terribly wrong. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the police to arrive. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer in control. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a setup. I had never been the type to hesitate when it came to making decisions, especially when it came to my kids. My mind was usually sharp, decisive, but tonight I was frozen. The girl on the porch was still standing there, staring at me through the peephole. Her face had gone completely blank, and the frantic energy she'd shown earlier seemed to have drained away entirely, leaving her unnervingly still. But I couldn't bring myself to open the door. My instincts, the ones that usually kept me grounded, were screaming at me not to let her in. Every fiber of my being was telling me to stay on the safe side, to lock the door, to trust my gut. But there was something about her, something about the look in her eyes that made me feel like if I turned away now, if I didn't help her, I might regret it forever. Still, I couldn't risk it. Not with my kids in the house. Not with the feeling gnawing at the back of my mind that something wasn't right. I glanced at Noah, standing quietly in the hallway, his eyes wide with fear. I tried to give him a reassuring smile, but it felt hollow. He was scared. And that made me scared too. "Stay where you are, Noah," I repeated, trying to sound calm, but my voice betrayed me. It cracked at the edges, the fear in my chest seeping through. He nodded, his little hands clutching the hem of his pajamas, his lips pressed tight together. I turned back to the door, my fingers still clutching the phone. The voice on the other end was steady, asking me to confirm my location, and I could hear sirens in the distance, slowly growing louder. I kept my eyes on the girl, but now she had stopped looking at the door. She was staring off toward the trees, her eyes flicking back and forth in a way that made me uncomfortable, like she was waiting for something or someone. The flashlight beam was still cutting through the rain, but it was closer now. Too close. My heart skipped a beat, and for a split second I thought about running upstairs to lock the windows, to barricade us in, but I couldn't leave the front door unattended. I couldn't leave her there. The girl suddenly stepped back from the door, her hands falling to her sides as if she had given up. It was strange. There was no more desperation, no more pleading. Her body language shifted from frantic to calm in the span of a few seconds, and that only made me more uneasy. Her face was empty, almost expressionless. Then she turned her head toward the driveway, her lips barely parting as she whispered, "He's here." That was it. That was all she said before she backed away from the door, disappearing into the rain-soaked darkness. My pulse quickened and I felt a cold, sharp panic grip my chest. I had no idea what was happening, but it was clear that something terrible was unfolding right outside my door. I swallowed hard, dialing 911 again, my hands shaking too much to even hold the phone steady. The dispatcher answered quickly, but my words were rushed, almost frantic. "He's here. There's someone out there in the woods. I can hear the flashlight. I think—" I stopped, trying to steady my breath. I didn't know what to say. "I think they're here for her." The dispatcher told me to stay inside, keep the door locked, and wait for the officers to arrive. But it was already too late. I could hear the heavy footsteps in the yard, the crunch of leaves beneath heavy boots, and my throat tightened in fear. The flashlight beam swung wildly, coming closer. And then the worst part, the man's voice, low and menacing, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Open the door, Claire," he called, his voice grating like sandpaper. "You made a mistake, not helping her. You'll regret it." I froze, my mind racing, trying to process what was happening. How did he know my name? How did he know I was standing there trembling behind the door, locked away like a coward? The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood there, clutching the phone, listening to the sound of his boots drawing closer, the flashlight beam flashing through the crack in the blinds. The man called out again, louder this time. "Open the door, Claire. Don't make me. Come in." My heart was racing, my body stiff with fear. I glanced over my shoulder at Noah. He had already crept closer, standing in the doorway of the living room now, his little face pale. Alex was still upstairs, and I didn't want to risk him hearing anything. There was no way I could open that door. I knew it. There was no good that could come from it. The sirens were getting louder, but it still felt like an eternity before anyone would arrive. Then there was a knock, soft, almost polite. But the voice came again, low and slow. "Let me in, Claire. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." And that's when it hit me. I wasn't dealing with some random stranger. This wasn't just a girl in trouble, no. I had been part of something I couldn't see, couldn't fully understand. And the moment I made the wrong decision, I had sealed our fate. The knock on the door was soft at first, almost gentle, like a polite visitor at a family home. But the second it echoed through the hallway, my blood ran cold. Something about it felt deliberate, like it was an invitation. No, not an invitation, an ultimatum. The air around me thickened, and for a split second I couldn't breathe. Stood there in the dark, eyes locked on the door, heart pounding in my chest. The only sound was the rain battering the windows, mixing with the low hum of the wind outside. The man's voice had faded, but the impact of his words hadn't. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." I could feel the weight of that statement like a suffocating pressure on my chest. How did he know my name? How did he know exactly where I was? I should have called 911 again, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The house felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in around me. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and confusion, my instincts clawing at me, telling me to run, to hide, but I couldn't leave the front door. I couldn't leave my kids. Noah stood behind me, his face pale and wide-eyed, clutching his stuffed bear to his chest like it was a lifeline. I didn't know how much he understood, but I knew the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. I gently put a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer him some comfort, but I felt hollow inside. I turned to the phone, still in my hand, the dispatcher's words echoing in my head. "Stay inside, Claire. Stay calm. Officers are on their way." But how long would that take? 10 minutes? 20? Longer? How much time did I have? I knew the answer. Not much. I took a deep breath and dialed 911 again, my fingers shaking as I pressed the buttons. The call connected quickly, and I could hear the calm voice of the dispatcher on the other end. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone outside my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, hoarse from fear. "A man. He's threatening me. He's trying to get in. He knows my name." "Stay inside, ma'am. Deputies are en route. Do not open the door. Do you have any weapons?" I shook my head, but quickly realized she couldn't see me. No, I'm alone with my 2 sons. Please hurry." There was a brief pause on the line before the dispatcher spoke again, her voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. "Ma'am, I need you to stay on the phone with me. Stay on the line. Deputies will be there soon." I couldn't stop shaking. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. I heard the knock again, this time louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a polite request anymore. It was a demand. Noah whimpered behind me, and I turned to him, kneeling down so we were eye to eye. "Stay quiet, Noah. Don't say a word. You hear me?" He nodded, his lip trembling as he held his stuffed bear tighter, his eyes never leaving me. The knock came again. This time it was paired with the man's voice. "Claire," he said, calm and slow. "I know you're in there. You're making a mistake." I stepped back, pressing my back against the door, clutching the phone in my hand as if it were a lifeline. The truth hit me then, sharp and unmistakable. This wasn't some random person. It wasn't even about the girl anymore. It was about... He knew I had called the police. He knew I wouldn't let her in. And he wasn't going to leave until I let him in. The minutes stretched into an eternity. My mind raced, trying to figure out my next move, trying to keep my children safe. But all I could do was wait. The pounding, the voice. It was like a terrible rhythm pulsing through the house, growing louder with every passing second. And then, as if in response to the growing tension, I heard something else. The sound of footsteps. Heavy footsteps dragging across the gravel outside. I stiffened, every muscle in my body seizing with fear. The flashlight beam that had cut through the rain earlier had disappeared, but I could hear it now. The low, guttural sound of boots crunching on the wet ground. It wasn't just one person. There were others. I didn't know if it was the girl or someone else, but I knew that I was trapped. And the realization that there were more of them, that this wasn't some random, isolated encounter, made my stomach churn with terror. They were methodical, patient, working together, and they knew exactly how to break someone like me. And then I heard it. The low screech of the front door handle turning. Slowly. Relentlessly. Someone was trying to force it open. I ran for the stairs. My heart in my throat, Noah at my heels, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had to get to Alex. I had to get to my kids. The phone was still in my hand, but it felt useless now. The police were on the way, but I couldn't count on them to be here in time. I reached the top of the stairs and burst into Alex's room, locking the door behind me. He was still asleep, his blankets tangled around him, oblivious to the chaos downstairs. I knelt by his bed, shaking him awake. "Alex, wake up, sweetie. Get dressed. Hurry." His eyes fluttered open, confused. "Mom? What's going on?" I didn't answer. I couldn't explain it to him. I just pulled him out of bed, shoved his shoes on his feet, and turned back toward the window. Through the blinds, I saw them, shadowy figures moving in the darkness outside. The flashlight beams were everywhere, flickering like ghosts. They were getting closer. I could hear the footsteps on the porch now, unmistakable in their heavy rhythm. Someone was right outside. It wasn't just one person, it sounded like at least two, maybe more. The weight of it pressed down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked back at Alex, his face pale and wide-eyed, still trying to process what was happening. "Mom, what's going on?" he whispered, his voice shaking. His hands gripped the edge of his bed, his little knuckles turning white. I pulled him into a tight hug, trying to calm him, but my own fear was suffocating me. I didn't have any answers, not anymore. I was supposed to protect them, Alex, Noah, but now I didn't know what to do. The door downstairs was locked, but that didn't make me feel safe. There were too many of them. Too many to hide from. Too many to fight off. "Stay quiet, Alex," I said, my voice low and strained. "Don't make a sound, do you hear me?" He nodded, still confused, but he didn't argue. The door handle downstairs jiggled again, louder this time, and the sound of it made my blood run cold. I could feel it, the pull of something darker, something that had been lurking in the shadows long before this night. The flashlight beams were still flickering through the window, moving like slow waves crashing against a shore, each one more deliberate than the last. I pulled the blinds apart just enough to get a glimpse of the outside. My breath caught in my throat. The porch light illuminated their faces for a split second, and I recognized them. The girl, the man, and then the third figure. A shadowy shape that I hadn't seen before, moving just behind the others, always watching. There was something unsettling about the third figure. It didn't move with the same intent as the others. It wasn't trying to get inside. It was just watching, lingering, like it was memorizing everything. My stomach churned. It knows I'm watching them. "Mom, please, I don't want to go outside." "I'm scared," Alex whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to explain to him that there Was no going back now, that there was no escaping what was happening outside our door, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't let them in. I couldn't let my children become part of whatever this was. Suddenly, the lights downstairs flickered, the power flickering on and off in a way that seemed almost orchestrated. The girl was pounding on the door again, but it wasn't just panic this time. There was a malicious edge to it, a kind of rhythm that felt rehearsed. It wasn't about her anymore. This wasn't about helping a scared girl. This wasn't about a simple misunderstanding. They were playing a game, and I was the target. I felt my breath quicken. I had to get to the phone. I fumbled through the drawers beside me, my hands shaking. Where was it? Where was my damn phone? Alex's eyes flicked to the door as the pounding grew louder. The sound of fists against wood was so intense it felt like it was going to break through the walls. I grabbed the phone finally, pressing it to my ear as I dialed 911 again. The dispatcher answered immediately, her voice calm. 911, what is your emergency? There are people outside my house. I don't know who they are, but they've been trying to get in. Please, you have to. Send someone now. My voice cracked. I was losing it. Losing my grip on the situation, on reality. Ma'am, we have deputies on the way. Stay inside. Do not open the door, the dispatcher said, her voice still firm. But there was something in it now that made me wonder. Had she heard this before? Had someone else been in my shoes? There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice a little quieter this time. Ma'am, stay on the line. I need you to remain calm. The line went dead. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't hear anything except the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears, the thrum of the blood rushing through my veins. The room felt small, the air heavy, like the walls were closing in around me. And then I heard it. The door downstairs creaked open. I jerked my head up, my heart leaping in my chest, my breath caught. Someone was inside, but I hadn't heard anyone break in. The door hadn't been forced, it had just opened. I looked over at Alex, who was staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. I didn't open it, he whispered. I grabbed him by the arm, pulling him away from the window. My mind was spinning now. There was no time left. They were in the house. I turned toward the closet, pulling out a small kitchen knife from the drawer, anything that could give me some semblance of control. But I knew deep down as I stood there in the dim light with Alex and Noah clutching my side, that the worst was yet to come. A whisper came from the hallway. I can hear you, Claire. It was the voice from outside, the same low, gravelly voice. My breath caught in my throat. The door opened wider, and from the dark hall I saw him, the man. The third figure was no longer a shadow. He was inside. I could feel the cold sweat trickle down my spine as the man's voice echoed from the hallway, low and almost soothing. It felt like a slow wave pulling me deeper, pushing me into something dark, something I couldn't fight against. My hands gripped the knife tighter, the cold metal digging into my palm, but no amount of steel would help me now. Alex was frozen beside me, his face pale with fear. I couldn't blame him. If I was being honest, I was scared too. Scared in a way I hadn't been before. When you're a mother, you always think you can protect your children, that you can somehow keep them safe from everything. But standing there, the weight of reality pressing down on me, I realized how powerless I really was. Noah, barely 7, clung to me tighter. He couldn't understand what was happening, but he could feel it, the danger in the air. I gently pried, his little fingers from my arm, trying to push him behind me, keeping him out of sight. If there was any chance of us making it out of this, it was going to depend on keeping them safe, keeping them quiet. Stay here, stay silent, I whispered, my voice cracking. They nodded, their small eyes wide and trusting. My heart shattered, a little. How could I protect them when I felt like I was falling apart? I had to keep it together. For them. The door creaked open wider, and I heard the man's footsteps echoing through the hall, slow and deliberate. The flashlight beam from earlier must have found its way inside because I could see the faint flicker of light from underneath the crack of the door. The beam was moving, casting long shadows across the walls. I took one step backward, careful not to make any noise. The last thing I needed was for them to know exactly where we were. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to get my kids the hell out of there. But the house was old, and the staircase creaked like it was about to give way. There was no way to escape silently, not with 3 of them, maybe more, already inside. I heard him mutter something, a low chuckle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You can't hide from me, Claire," he called, his voice cutting through the silence. "You let me in the moment you opened that door." I didn't know how he knew my name. I didn't know why it felt like he knew everything about me. I didn't care. I couldn't focus on that. I needed to protect my boys. They were the only thing that mattered now. I turned to the window, my only option. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. I pulled the blinds back slowly, trying not to make a sound, and peered out. The rain was still coming down hard, blurring my vision, but I could see the faint outline of a truck parked in the driveway. The girl's figure was still there, standing by the window, her hollow eyes staring straight back at me, and the man with the prison tattoos standing nearby. He was watching the house, waiting. I knew what they were doing. They were methodical, planning their next move. They had been scouting, studying my every move, and now they were inside. I had to make a choice. I reached for the phone again, my fingers trembling. I was about to call 911 when I heard a loud thump on the floor upstairs. Then another. They were moving, slowly, deliberately, coming closer. Closed my eyes for a second, steeling myself. It was now or never. I grabbed the knife with both hands, a sudden surge of determination coursing through me. I couldn't let them take us. I had to fight. I took one last look at my sons. "Stay in here," I said in a low whisper, my voice steady now. "Don't come out no matter what." I heard their soft, frightened breaths behind me as I moved toward the stairs. The footsteps downstairs were closer now, right at the base of the stairs. I could see their shadows moving in the hallway, waiting for me to make my next move. I took a deep breath and rushed up the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. The house was creaking beneath me, the floorboards groaning under my weight, but I couldn't slow down. I reached the top, my hand steady on the banister, and there he was, the man, standing at the top of the stairs, smiling at me with that horrible, predatory grin. His eyes were black, empty, and they bored into me as if he knew everything. "You didn't listen, Claire," he said, his voice low, almost disappointed. My heart raced, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I couldn't be. Not when it was just me standing between him and my boys. The moment I had opened the door was the moment I had lost control, but I wasn't going to lose my family. "Get away from me," I said, my voice trembling with fury. He just smiled. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance. At first, it sounded like nothing more than a soft hum, but the sound grew louder, closer. I could feel the rush of relief flooding through me, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. He stepped toward me and I raised the knife. But just as I was about to make my move, the door crashed open behind me. The sound of boots on the stairs, loud and frantic, broke the moment. Deputies flooded the hallway, their guns drawn. The man froze, his smile faltering, then quickly replaced with something darker, more dangerous. But it was too late. The officers swarmed, and in seconds he was tackled to the ground, cuffed, and pulled away from me. I collapsed against the wall, my body shaking violently. I hadn't realized until that moment how much fear had drained me. The deputies moved quickly, pulling the girl from the house, her expression blank, like she wasn't even aware of what had just happened. The sheriff's face was grim as he looked over at me. "Ma'am, you did the right thing. You called us in time." But even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about the way the girl had looked at me, the way she had smiled before they took her away. And then I saw him, the third figure. He was still watching from the back seat of the patrol car, and even though the man was locked away, the girl was gone. The terror still lingered in my bones because I knew, no matter how far they went, they were still out there, waiting, and the knock at Ravenwood Lane had only just begun. The hum of the highway had been constant all night. The road was slick with the remnants of a recent rain, and the only light came from the distant street lamps that flickered like tired eyes. My shift at the hospital had run late, again. I was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively, and I just wanted to get home. All I could think about was my bed and a hot cup of coffee. My car's dashboard clock flashed 2:37 a.m., reminding me just how long it had been since I last saw daylight. I was miles away from home, the small town where I'd grown up, and as I passed the exit signs for Blackwood Acres, I realized I needed to stop for gas. There hadn't been a gas station for miles, and it wasn't until I saw the worn, flickering neon sign that I noticed how desperate I was. The sign above the station read, "Midnight Gas," its letters buzzing sporadically, as if the station itself was too tired to function properly. The gas pumps were old, rusty, probably relics from the 90s. But it was the only place in sight, and I knew I had no other choice. I pulled in, trying not to think about how lonely and desolate the place looked. The gas station was nearly abandoned, the fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow across cracked pavement, stretching long shadows into the night. The air smelled faintly of oil and stale coffee, an odd mix that reminded me of places I used to visit with my mom when I was little. She used to say that these kinds of places had their own kind of charm, but that charm had been long gone tonight. All that was left was a sense of wrongness that crept under my skin. As I parked near the pump, I noticed the three men hanging around near the station's grimy windows. They didn't look like they were there for gas. They weren't moving, just standing still, watching me. One of them grinned as I got out of the car. His teeth were yellow under the harsh fluorescent lights, his face half hidden by the hood of his jacket. I didn't know why, but something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. I felt my pulse pick up, and I quickly glanced toward the clerk in the small booth, hoping for some kind of reassurance. But the man behind the counter wouldn't meet my eyes. He was just staring at something on his phone, acting like I didn't exist. I shoved my credit card into the machine with trembling hands, trying not to look at the men. I could feel their eyes on me, and it made every inch of my body scream to run. I wasn't sure if I was just being paranoid or if I was picking up on something that wasn't quite right. But I didn't trust it. I couldn't trust it. The pump clicked, signaling the gas tank was full. I had enough of this place. I slammed the nozzle back into its cradle and hurried toward the car, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I heard it. A low, sharp whistle. It came from the direction of the men, cutting through the quiet night like a knife. It wasn't friendly. It was an invitation, or maybe a threat, I couldn't tell. I jumped into my car, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the lot. My headlights blazed down the dark highway as I tried to shake the feeling that I was being followed. It wasn't until I glanced in the rearview mirror that I saw the truck. It was a dark, bulky vehicle, its headlights blinding in the reflection. It was close. Too close. I gritted my teeth and pressed harder on the gas, but the truck was right on my bumper, tailing me like it had all the time in the world. I swerved, trying to lose them, but they matched every move. I reached for my phone, desperate to dial 911, but there was no signal. The dead zone between counties. I cursed under my breath and tried to focus on the road. I needed to make it to Blackwood Acres. My sister lived there, just a few miles away. If I could get there, I'd be safe. I pushed my foot down harder on the gas pedal, praying I could make it in time. The truck wasn't giving up. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears, and I forced myself to ignore the knot of fear growing in my stomach. I couldn't let them catch me. Not tonight. I glanced at the road sign as it flashed by. Blackwood Acres, 2 miles. It was all I had left. The tires of my car screeched against the wet pavement as I pushed the accelerator harder, desperate to gain some distance. The headlights of the truck behind me were searing through the rearview mirror, reflecting off the wet asphalt in a dizzying, blinding display. It felt like they were right on top of me, as if the truck were no longer a mere vehicle, but a monstrous thing chasing me down the highway. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath shallow and frantic. I cursed under my breath, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. My palms were slick with sweat despite the cold night air. I couldn't think straight. The road ahead was nothing but darkness, save for the occasional flickering streetlight. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to get out of this. Should I speed through a side street, pull over, and pretend everything was fine? But the more I thought, the more I realized there was no safe place. The dead zone. No phone signal. I cursed again, realizing I couldn't even call 911 to ask for help. I knew no one could reach me in time. If they were following me this closely, I'd never make it to Blackwood Acres. The fear surged, hot and heavy in my chest. I glanced at the truck again. It hadn't moved. In fact, it was practically glued to my rear bumper. They were toying with me, just waiting for me to make a mistake. Maybe I was wrong, but I didn't get the sense that they were in a hurry. No, they were savoring it, like some kind of sick game. I needed a plan. Something, anything. Blackwood Acres. It wasn't much farther. My sister lived there with her husband, Jake. He wasn't the kind of man who would hesitate to help in an emergency. He had a shotgun collection, and I knew he didn't mind using them when necessary. The idea of getting there, of having Jake step in, offered a shred of comfort, but I knew deep down that comfort wasn't enough. These men didn't seem like the kind who could be easily scared off. I tried not to look at the truck in my rearview mirror, but the reflection of its headlights in the glass made my stomach churn. Every few seconds they would flash into view like an animal's eyes in the dark. I couldn't tell if the driver was just being reckless, or if they had a plan. Either way, they were getting closer. They weren't stopping. I forced my foot down, harder on the pedal, pushing the car faster, but the truck stayed right behind me. It was like I was moving in slow motion and they were accelerating just enough to stay close. I wasn't getting anywhere. My mind screamed at me to be smarter, to outmaneuver them, but there was no room to maneuver, just the endless stretch of highway, my tires spinning in the wet, the rhythm of their pursuit beating in my ears. Then, I saw the sign. Blackwood Acres, 1 mile. My chest tightened. I was almost there. But were they going to let me make it? The truck was still riding my bumper, unwavering, and I could see the outline of a figure in the cab now. Someone was definitely watching, me waiting. I tried not to imagine the look in their eyes, but I couldn't stop myself. It was too dark to make out details, but the figure seemed just too still, like they were enjoying this. My tires slid slightly on the wet road as I veered left into the turn that led toward my sister's neighborhood. I prayed I hadn't misjudged it, but the truck was still right behind me, blocking out the night with its huge headlights. The feeling of being trapped was overwhelming. I could hear my heartbeat, the pulse of it in my neck and my fingertips as I gripped the steering wheel harder. My hands were clammy now, and it wasn't just the rain. It was terror. Fear coiled in my gut, knotting tighter and tighter with each passing second. But then I saw it. My sister's house came into view. The porch light was on, illuminating the narrow driveway. The familiar outline of their old house stood strong against the darkened woods behind it. I was so close I could almost feel the relief. Almost. I stomped on the brakes and fishtailed into the driveway. The sudden motion jerked my body forward, and I gripped the wheel, trying to regain control of the car. The gravel crunched under my tires, and I felt the rear of the car slide before it came to a halt. Then, the truck behind me screeched to a halt, blocking me in. I froze. My hands didn't even feel real anymore. They were shaking. I could barely breathe. For a split second, I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I stayed completely still, they wouldn't notice me. But of course I knew that was ridiculous. The truck's engine rumbled, its headlights piercing through the darkness like two huge predatory eyes. The men got out slowly, their movements deliberate. They were too calm, too patient, like they'd been waiting for this moment. I could hear one of them talking. His voice was too smooth, too controlled. "Nice night for a visit," he drawled, tapping a knife against his thigh. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't make myself move. My feet were frozen on the pedals, my mind screaming at me to run. But my body was too scared to listen. The seconds stretched, felt like hours, until I heard the sound I hadn't expected. The click of a shotgun being cocked. My breath caught in my throat. Jake. My brother-in-law Jake appeared on the porch, his silhouette framed by the light from inside the house. I couldn't see the gun in his hands, but I could hear it. How it was racked, a sharp metallic sound that sliced through the tension in the air. "Next step's your last," Jake's voice rang out, low and calm, but I could hear the threat in his tone. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. It was as if the world held its breath. Then the men shifted, and without a word, they turned and walked back to the truck. The engine revved and the tires spit gravel as they tore off into the night, disappearing into the dark, like shadows vanishing under the cover of night. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stayed in the car, my hands still gripping the wheel, my eyes locked on the road ahead. I sat there for what felt like forever. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white from the tension, my breath coming in shaky bursts. The truck was gone now, its headlights swallowed by the night, but the terror lingered in the pit of my stomach like a heavy weight. I wanted to get out of the car. I wanted to run up to my sister's house and throw myself into Jake's arms, but I couldn't. Not yet. It didn't feel real. How had it gone from a simple gas stop to this? How had I gone from the mundane routine of my late-night shift to being chased down by men who seemed like they were out of some nightmare? I looked at the dashboard clock again. 2:57 a.m. A few minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. It was like time had slowed down during that whole ordeal, stretching out every second into an eternity. I slowly exhaled and pushed the door open, the chill of the night air hitting me like a slap. I needed to move, to do something, but my body refused to cooperate. I was still trapped in a haze, the adrenaline of the chase lingering in my veins. I could feel my heart racing, but I had no energy to deal with it yet. My legs felt weak beneath me as I stepped out of the car, my hands trembling as I locked the door behind me. I didn't even look back at the driveway. My eyes were locked. On the porch where Jake stood, his silhouette framed in the light, he was still holding the shotgun. I could hear his steady breath in the silence of the night. "Lena," he called out to me, his voice breaking the silence like a crack in glass. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say something, but my throat was tight. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I moved, my legs carrying me toward him without a second thought. I needed to feel safe, needed to know I wasn't alone in this. As I reached the porch steps, I stumbled, and Jake's hand shot out to steady me. "Hey," he said softly, his eyes searching my face. "Talk to me. What happened?" I could see the worry etched on his features, but there was something else, too. A readiness, a preparedness that came with knowing what it meant to protect those you loved. He was no stranger to danger, not with the life he'd lived, and I could see the intensity in his gaze as he scanned the darkened driveway, as if he was expecting the men to turn around at any moment. They followed me," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "From the gas station. I don't know why, but they wouldn't let up. They just kept following me, and I couldn't shake them." I swallowed hard, trying to push the fear down. It wasn't easy. The events were still so fresh in my mind, too vivid, too real. I couldn't erase the sound of their truck roaring behind me, or the feeling of their eyes on me. "They got out of the truck," I continued, my voice shaky. "They had knives, and one of them," he was smiling at me. I didn't know what to do. I just drove as fast as I could, hoping I'd make it here. Jake didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his hand still on my shoulder, looking out into the night. I could tell he was processing everything, running through all the possibilities in his head. Finally, he spoke. "We're going inside," he said firmly. "You're safe now, but we need to talk about what happened." I nodded, grateful that He didn't push for more details right away. I could feel my mind beginning to race again, the sharp edges of fear creeping back into my thoughts. But I pushed it down, trying to keep it together. I had to. For Jake's sake. For my sister's. We walked inside, and I felt the familiar warmth of the house envelop me. I didn't realize how cold I had been until I was inside, the warmth wrapping around me like a blanket. Jake led me straight to the living room, where the low light from a single lamp cast a soft glow over the room. My sister, Sarah, was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She looked up as we entered, and her eyes immediately landed on me. "Lena?" she asked, her voice soft but full of concern. "What happened? You look pale." I collapsed onto the couch next to her, finally feeling my body give in to the exhaustion and the fear. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came without warning. I hadn't cried since I was a kid, but tonight, everything broke open. Sarah wrapped her arms around me, pulling me close. "It's okay. You're safe here. Just tell us what happened." I let out a shaky breath, wiping my eyes, and began to explain the rest of the story. The men, the truck, the way they had followed me, how I had barely made it here. As I spoke, I saw Jake moving toward the window, his eyes scanning the yard. Outside, the streetlights casting long shadows over the driveway. He wasn't just listening, he was watching. He was alert. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Jake turned back to us, his expression grim. "It's not over, Lena," he said quietly. "Those guys aren't going to let this go. Not if they've been following you all this time. They're not just going to disappear." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside me. I had been hoping for a sense of relief, but Jake was right. I wasn't safe, not yet. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. That's when I saw it. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there, wrapped up in my own thoughts. But something outside caught my eye. Movement. A shadow slipping past the window right outside the house. It was fast, almost too fast, and I barely had time to process what I'd seen before my heart skipped a beat. "Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Someone's out there." He didn't hesitate. The shotgun was in his hands in an instant, his eyes narrowing as he stepped toward the door. "Stay inside," he said, his tone hard. I opened my mouth to protest, but then I saw the look in his eyes. He wasn't asking for permission. He was protecting us. Jake stepped outside and the door clicked shut behind him. I could barely breathe as I watched from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence stretched out, longer than it should have, but eventually I saw him return to the porch, his posture still tense. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking out into the night. "Lena," he said, his voice low, "we need to be prepared. This isn't over." The sound of Jake's boots on the wooden floor echoed through the house as he came back inside, the door creaking slightly as he shut it behind him. I still hadn't moved from the couch, still holding onto Sarah's arm, my body stiff with tension. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The quiet of the house was almost suffocating, a heavy silence that seemed to wrap itself around us like a suffocating blanket. Jake stood in the entryway for a moment, his back to us, his eyes scanning the dark night through the window. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched as if he were holding something back. Finally, he turned, the look on his face unreadable. "Jake?" Sarah asked softly, her voice filled with concern. She reached for him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "Someone was out there," he said, his voice low. "But they're gone now." His eyes met mine, then Sarah's. "They know where we are." I felt a chill run down my spine at the gravity in his voice. He wasn't just talking about the men from earlier. He was talking about something deeper. A warning. "They could come back, Lena," Jake continued, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't just a random encounter. They were after something, and they won't stop until they get it." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I understood the full extent of what he was saying. What did they want? Why had they followed? Me all the way here? And more importantly, why hadn't they gone away after we'd scared them off? The fear was still crawling under my skin, making it difficult to think straight. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Jake, what should we do?" Should we call the police? Maybe. No. Jake cut her off, shaking his head. The police won't be able to help. Not now, not with what's going on. I've been on enough cases to know when someone's playing a game. They want to get inside our heads. And right now, Lena's their target. I felt the air shift around me. My stomach twisted. Target? I didn't want to believe it, but the weight of Jake's words felt too real to ignore. I was their target. I swallowed hard, trying to get the lump in my throat to go away. I had been so focused on getting to Blackwood Acres, on making it here, safely, that I hadn't stopped to consider what came after. I was so naive, thinking the worst was over. But Jake was right. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Then what do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked at me, his expression hardening. We stay alert. We lock everything down. We make sure we don't give them a chance to get close again. He turned toward the front door and began locking, double-checking the deadbolt before pulling the curtain down over the window. Sarah stood up next to me, her face pale but composed. She didn't say anything, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She was doing her best to be strong for me, just like Jake. I had to be strong too, but every part of me wanted to curl up in a corner and pretend none of this was happening. We need to make sure the phones are charged too, Jake added, walking over to the kitchen counter where the landline phone sat. He picked it up, making sure there was a dial tone before setting it back down. Keep your phones close. Keep them on loud. If they come back, we need to be able to reach help, fast. I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling that even that wouldn't be enough. What if help couldn't get here in time? What if we were already too late? Jake seemed to read the unease on my face. He walked over to where I was sitting and crouched down in front of me, his hands on my knees. Hey, you're safe here. They won't get in without a fight. We're not letting them near you, not on my watch. His words were comforting, but they didn't do much to ease the tightness in my chest. I had spent my whole life trusting in safety and routine, in the idea that the world was predictable, manageable. But now I couldn't even trust a simple stop for gas to be safe. What do you mean by they want something, Jake? I asked, the question burning on the tip of my tongue. What do they want with me? Why would they follow me? Jake was silent for a moment, his eyes searching mine as if trying to find the right words. Finally, he stood up, pacing across the room before turning back to me. I don't know, Lena, but what I do know is that people like them, they don't act like this for nothing. You weren't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They have a reason for following you. I think they're playing with us, testing us. I could feel the cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. I wasn't just a victim of some random encounter. I was a part of whatever twisted game these men were playing. The thought made me feel small, powerless. It didn't make sense. Why me? I don't get it, I muttered, my voice small and frustrated. Why now? Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Jake exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face in frustration. You didn't deserve this. You didn't do anything wrong. But that doesn't matter to them. People like them. They don't need a reason. They don't need to explain themselves. They're playing their own game. The words stung because I didn't want to believe that. I wanted to think there was some logical explanation, some way to fix this, some way to make it go away, but there wasn't. Jake was right. There were no answers, no simple way out. Sarah reached over and pulled me into a hug. I leaned into her, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. It was comforting, but even that couldn't completely shield me from the fear gnawing at my insides. I'm scared, Sarah, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I don't know what to do. I know, she said softly, her hand rubbing my back in small circles. But you're not alone. You have us. We'll figure this out together. For the first time since I'd pulled into Blackwood Acres, I let myself cry. Not because I was weak, but because I was tired. I was so tired of being afraid, of feeling powerless. I had been running, trying to outrun this nightmare, but it was clear now that there was no escaping it. I had to face it, whatever it was, and I wasn't going to face it alone. Not anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur of half-sleep and heightened tension. Jake had placed extra locks on all the doors, double-checked the windows, and turned off the outside lights to keep any shadows from giving away our position. The house was quiet, too quiet. I kept waiting for the unmistakable sound of an engine, the low rumble of that truck following us, but it didn't come. The stillness was almost worse than the noise. It hung in the air, oppressive, as if the world were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sarah had stayed close to me, and I was grateful for it. I didn't feel safe anywhere else, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel safe again. I kept thinking about those men, about the way they had watched me at the gas station, the way one of them had smiled, the sharp gleam of the knife tapping against his thigh. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting. At some point I must have drifted off because I woke with a start to the sound of the phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. I bolted upright, my heart slamming into my ribs, my breath coming fast and shallow. Sarah was already on her feet, her eyes wide with alarm. Jake was in the hallway moving toward us with purpose, his hand on the shotgun slung over his shoulder. The phone buzzed again, and I realized it wasn't the house phone. It was my cell, still on the kitchen counter. I could hear the message ping through, but I couldn't make myself move. A deep dread settled over me. I knew what it was. The phone rang once more before it went silent. My fingers curled into fists, but I couldn't bring myself to walk over and check it. Something told me I didn't need to look. I already knew what the message would say. "Lena?" Sarah said softly, her hand on my shoulder, her voice laced with concern. "What's wrong?" "Check the phone," I croaked, my voice hoarse, barely audible. "Please." Jake was already on the move, crossing the room to grab the phone. He was careful, cautious, as though expecting something to happen at any moment. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. "I don't like this," Jake muttered under his breath. "Let me see," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart hammering in my chest. He handed the phone to me without a word, his expression tense, and I could barely hold my hand steady as I unlocked the screen. The message was simple, the words barely fitting on the small display. "We know where you live now." My stomach dropped, the words searing into my brain like a brand. But there was more. Below the text was a photo. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to tap the screen. My heart stopped when the image appeared. It was a photo of my bedroom window, taken from the outside. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling, and it fell to the floor with a soft thud. A shudder rippled through me, and I couldn't stop the cold sweat that broke out along my skin. "Lena," Sarah whispered, her voice full of fear. "What are we supposed to do?" Jake's hand clenched into a fist. His eyes narrowed. "They're playing with us," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "They want us to know they're close. They want to scare us." "They won't stop, will they?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Jake's eyes locked with mine, and for a moment I saw the vulnerability in his gaze. He didn't know what to do either. We were stuck in a nightmare with no clear way out. We couldn't stay here. I knew that now. There was no telling when those men would show up again, and I couldn't risk putting Sarah and Jake in more danger. I looked around the room, my eyes scanning the walls, trying to think of a way out of this. But everything felt closed in. I was trapped like a rat in a cage with no way of escaping the fear. "I have an idea," Jake said suddenly, his voice sharp with resolve. "We leave. Now. We don't wait for them to come to us. We go to them." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. Jake's gaze was intense. "We go to the place they've been hiding. We find out who they are, what they want, and we make it clear that they're not going to mess with us anymore." I blinked, the idea shocking. Me. "You want to confront them? You really think that's a good idea?" "I think it's the only one we have left," Jake said, his voice steady. "If we wait here, we're just sitting ducks. But if we confront them, if we get them before they get us, maybe we can end this nightmare." The words settled in the air between us, heavy and dangerous. I didn't know if I was ready to go that far, but something in me snapped. Maybe it was the fear that had been gnawing at me for too long. Or maybe it was the anger that was building inside me, a slow burn that wanted to take control. "We'll do it," I said, the decision coming out of my mouth before I could second-guess myself. "We'll go to them." Sarah didn't say anything at first, but she nodded slowly, understanding the seriousness of what we were about to do. "We'll stick together," she said, her voice resolute. "We have to. We can't be separated." We gathered our things quickly, phones, jackets, and whatever we could grab in the chaos of the moment. Jake took the shotgun, checking the load with a practiced hand before he turned to face us. "You ready?" he asked, his voice sharp. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I had no other choice. "Then let's go," Jake said. We left the house, stepping out into the dark night. The wind bit at our faces, the cold air a stark contrast to the warmth of the house we were leaving behind. The truck was still out there somewhere. I could feel it in my bones. We didn't have a plan. We didn't know where the men were, but we were done running. And maybe, just maybe, we would put an end to this. As we got into the car, Jake started. The engine and the sound of it roared to life in the silence of the night. We drove off into the darkness, the headlights cutting through the blackness ahead of us. The hunt wasn't over yet. But now, it was our turn to chase.